Hi, good morning, everyone. So yesterday we had discussed globalization and its impact on Indian society, and wherein we had looked its impact on various sections of the society and various social institutions. Now, yesterday we were left with these questions that we had to discuss. So let's wait for a minute so that everyone joins this discussion. I hope everyone is looking into previous year questions while revising. But that's how you get a fair idea as to how you have to proceed and whether you're going in the right direction or not. Yes, we do look at questions here in the class, but it's better if you look at questions during revision as well. Okay, so let's start with that discussion. The first question is, this has been asked in the previous year. Critically examine the effects of globalization on the aged population in India. That is, we have to see how elderly get impacted because of globalization. So this is something we had done that exercise wherein everyone participated, and we had discussed this question indirectly, but yes. So here we would have to highlight both the negative and positive effects of globalization on the elderly. So please give a quick thumbs up if you'll be able to take up this question. So this has been discussed yesterday. Okay, great. Now the other question is, which has again been discussed, is the positive and negative effects of globalization on women in India. So in this section, we haven't discussed in greater detail, but the next chapter that we are going to start after urbanization is going to be role of women. So we are going to take up this dimension with role of women. Even though by now you would have understood how to approach this question, but let's take it up with the next chapter. There are other questions. Now look at these questions. All these questions talk about our cultural diversity and homogenization. So when we talked about globalization, we're saying that it is a homogenizing force, but we had looked into a few examples of how this homogenizing force called globalization leads to strengthening of cultural practices as well. So if you look at all these questions, you have to see that they have been asked in a different manner, but they indicate towards the same thing. So the first question talks about globalization, which is usually said to promote cultural homogeneity, but it strengthens cultural specialities as well. So let's take up this question and discuss this with your inputs. So try to answer this question. So we have to look at two aspects. How does it promote cultural homogeneity? And how can it strengthen cultural specialities? So please suggest, how do we approach this question? What are the factors? How does globalization promote cultural homogeneity? Can you please suggest? Weightage of social issues is somewhere around 50 to 60 marks in paper 1, and another 40 marks, around 40 marks in paper 2. That is social justice. Okay, religion, language. So first we have to talk about homogeneity. So accommodation of different cultures can be left for later. Then what other aspects of Indian cultural tradition? The way we dress. What else? Okay, so you can look at these dimensions and think that how these dimensions, these have all been suggested by you, how these dimensions have been impacted, and how is it that our culture is becoming homogeneous because of these. So with religion, you can talk about the secularization. Also, you can talk about the ritual practices that used to happen previously, which do not anymore. So there are two sides of it. One is our culture, leaving our cultural practices behind. That is one aspect, and the other aspect is changing those cultural practices and adopting something universal, which makes it homogeneous. So in this question, in the first question, they're talking about how it promotes cultural homogeneity, but also it strengthens cultural specialities. So these dimensions can be looked into, but these have been discussed in greater detail previously. Now talk about what strengthens cultural specialities. What are the factors which can impact this dimension? Role of UNESCO. Perfect. The idea of backlash against globalization is better if we keep it towards the end. Let's see how globalization does it directly, and then we'll come to the indirect part of it. So yes, backlash is one dimension, but let's keep it towards the end. Where you prioritize. So our capital is global economy, so you can understand it as internationalization of culture. Yes, you can talk about GI tag with example though. Okay, great. So you are suggesting a few things. We can give examples, but the way we have to see it as the cultural practices that are finding a new stage, international stage because of globalization. That is one aspect. Another aspect is with increasing tourism, and with this, I had given an example of neo-localism, because of which these cultural specialities get strengthened as well. Yes, you can add festivals here and talk about festivals. How increasingly Indian festivals are being celebrated outside India as well. And another thing is, you can when you talk about this, you can bring in the role of international organization that is done. Then you can talk about the role of government in promoting cultural, in strengthening cultural speciality. So we had given various examples. Also, yes, social media can talk about the spread of social media, with which our cultural specialities become important. New localism has been discussed yesterday, so you can just take it from there. Yes, we can talk about soft power. Absolutely, yes. Right. So yes, this is a question wherein you had to look at both the sides of the dimension of cultural homogeneity. Then another question is, are we losing our local identity for the global identity? So with the in this question, what you would have to understand is, yes, you would have understand the essence of it, that how what the question is asking about. But another thing is that you have to see what is your local identity and what is the global identity that we are talking about. So can someone tell me about what is this global identity that has been mentioned here? Yes, the idea of global citizens, but how do you understand this identity? It can be said to be primarily Western, yes. Using globally recognized languages, yes. Moving on with the global trends, can that be one? Can be mentioned moving on with your global trends with respect to fashion. So you can give example of fashion industry for that matter. Suddenly you're saying globalization that I'm not able to understand. What does that mean? So please throw a little light on it. Yes. So what we have to see here is, when we talk about global identity, yes, you're giving examples in the right direction. So when you have to understand global identity, so global identity is not equivalent to, say, your American or Western identity, but yes, primarily it is impacted by that. So you can talk about various aspects of your global identity. Then they are talking about the local identity. What is your local identity? How do you relate to your local identity? On the basis of region, on the basis of language, on the basis of culture. In culture, you can talk about various dimensions for that matter. Yes. Now, are we losing our local identity for the global identity? We have to discuss. Now, we have to see that it has been posed as a question, and we have to approach it from both the sides. We don't have to keep it simple. We don't have to keep one side. We can cover both the sides, because it is up to us which side do we want to take. And it is better to be in the center, to take the middle path rather than moving to one extreme. So yes, it will proceed like the other question, the previous question, but you do have to understand that there is a little difference with respect to global identity. So in introduction of this question, we talk about the global identity, and then in the body part, you can talk about how we are moving away from our local identity to global identity. And then in conclusion, you can create that balance, saying that there are a few aspects wherein the local identity, because of which, few factors because of which the local identity is getting strengthened. So I hope this question is clear. Then also the next question is, are diversity and pluralism in India under threat due to globalization? Again, on the similar lines, so you have to understand that how the cultural diversity is under threat due to globalization. So yes, your local identity with respect to being faithful and respectful of local traditions. So yes, that is on a psychological level. So you have to cover all the dimensions. That is right, because this is something that we have discussed yesterday. So we talk about diversity. We talk about diversity in terms of religion, in terms of culture, in terms of language, etc., etc., etc. And we have to see whether it is under threat due to globalization. Again, you have to talk about the aspect of cultural homogeneity. Then you have to highlight a few examples from how this cultural diversity is getting better. Because you can again talk about cultural diversity because of, so one is the idea of homogenization of culture, another is cultural diversity. So this cultural diversity you can talk about because of increasing influence of globalization. So one is we are losing our cultural diversity. Another thing is, because of globalization, we have new people coming in. Then again, people are moving outside, getting experiencing newer cultures, experiencing diverse cultures. And you can quote example from your cities, from urban areas, where it is a cultural mixing experience. So previously, before globalization or before the rise of cities as well, before the rise of urbanization, you can see that even across the country, we were not able to experience different cultures. So we would not know how someone from South India behaves, or how is their culture. But now it has increasingly become simpler to interact and to experience someone else's culture. Then again, you can talk about the diversity, increase in diversity. So there are two dimensions to it. One is increase in diversity, and the other one is decrease in diversity. Also, with respect to increase, it can be because of globalization, in the sense that newer cultures, newer cultural experience you can talk about, wherein more and more you get exposed to new cultures. Then also you can talk about the cultural mixing, or the idea of localization, or rather the idea of interaction between two cultures and creating something new, which also adds to the diversity. Now this is about diversity that you can see. Now again, the other aspect in this question is pluralism. Even though while writing the answer you have to take them together, but when we talk about pluralism, pluralism can be simply understood as accepting diversity, the acceptance of this diversity. So in India, one, we see that we are a diverse country. Another thing is, we are accommodative of this diversity. So to accommodate diversity can be understood as pluralism. Now, what has happened to this aspect? What has happened to the idea of accepting this diversity, accommodating this diversity? One you can talk about is the positive side of it, and the other one is negative. So can someone suggest few examples and few factors wherein we can say that the idea of pluralism, the acceptance of this diversity, is under threat? Can someone suggest because of which reasons this is under threat? Because this also follows from our discussion on cultural on impact of globalization on culture. So acceptance to this, yes, in the form of backlash. You're right, Manoj. In the form of backlash, you can see that this acceptance to diversity is under threat because of backlash to globalization. But also, if you see that this pluralism, you will find that because of globalization and increasing awareness, a lot of groups have started asserting their identities. So assertion of identity is one because of awareness, rise in awareness. Another thing is because of the homogenizing force that globalization is. So feeling that their culture is under threat, they have started asserting their identities. Now, because of them asserting their identities, they get in conflict one with each other and also with the majority culture. Okay, great. So Rahul has suggested all the points all at once, and he's talking about the decrease in the negative aspects or the negative dimension of pluralism in terms of discrimination, various sections getting discriminated against, and you can quote examples from your recent, say, cultural conflicts. Then the idea of segregation, exploitation. Exploitation follows from discrimination, and also now this is one side of it. This is one side of it, that the acceptance to diversity is on a decrease. But how do you look at the impact of globalization on pluralism in positive light? Impact of globalization on pluralism in positive light. How do you think pluralism has been strengthened because of globalization? So one simple idea can be that now you experience more and more different and newer cultures, which makes you comfortable with different cultural practices, etc., and you become more you accept it more than you did previously. Also, with globalization, you see that newer cultures in form of say interaction between various cultures are coming up. So there is again a sense of acculturation as well, wherein various cultures, when they intermingle, they share or exchange each other's cultural traits, because of which there has been a positive impact on pluralism. Yes, so with increase in tourism, etc., because these are again the factors which contribute to pluralism. So rather than getting into the factors, we have to talk about how is it happening. So it is not backless. Backless as in backlessness. It is backlash. Backlash means giving a negative reaction to something. Okay, great. So you're talking about the caste system as well, that the importance of caste system, the importance of religion has also gone down significantly because of globalization and modernization, and also which makes us of accepting nature. Yes, coexistence brings these changes of raciality, etc. So I hope you'll be able to answer these questions, and you would definitely try to write a couple of these questions. So with this, you can see that we have covered our various aspects and impacts of globalization. Now the next theme that we are going to touch is urbanization. Now urbanization, simply understood, is the rise of population in urban areas because of migration from rural areas and more areas becoming urban, more and more people migrating to urban areas. So yes, we'll come to the definition. Question 3 has been explained already. Now if you see in timeline, we say that we have been transitioning from an agrarian economy towards a service sector economy. And with transition from this agrarian economy to industrial and ultimately to service sector based economy, you see that more and more of people, more and more of our population is moving towards urban areas, which is not just a trend in India, it is a global trend. And you can see with this graph that how the urban population has been on a rise. Now, one thing is that we see this is the global picture of urbanization. So globally, how urbanization has happened. Another dimension that we have to remember, and you have to keep this in mind, is that in India, there are few changes. It is significantly different from urbanization of the West. So what is this peculiar phenomenon with respect to India, with respect to urbanization in India? So this is something you have to keep in mind while proceeding with this, because a direct question as well can be asked: how is it that the urbanization in India is different in terms of the process compared to the West? Now also, so one idea is the increase in population. Another idea is more and more people migrating to those areas. Now you can see that this is the graph which talks about the growth of urban population in India since 1951 until 2011. And this is how you see that there has been a significant growth. Now, but in India, one peculiarity that you can find is, if you talk about any other country, if you talk about particularly Western country, you find that the rise in urban population has been steep. The rise in urban population in terms of rate has been more compared to the rise in rural population. But in India, you'll find, and you can see that rural population is increasing at an even faster rate. So don't you think this is something different? This is something different from the rest of the world. Now also, similarly, we'll bring about differences with respect to the global idea of urbanization and the peculiarity with respect to the Indian case. Now, if you look at these images, what we'll say is that these two, this is something that you can simply find out, that these two images are about rural India, and the other two, this image and this image, can be related to urban India. Now, what are these factors that come in your mind when you were trying to identify these pictures? What are these factors that differentiate the rural from the urban? Can you think about these factors? Now, before you think about these factors, I would want you to break it down, because if you want to see what are the differences between rural and urban areas, you talk about various aspects. For example, how is the economy different? How is the society different? Right? Similarly, how is the political structure different? Then you can also talk about the environment that these areas have. So these are various dimensions on basis of which you can discuss. So yes, starting with economy, everyone is talking about the primary occupation in rural areas being agriculture. Also, if you talk about economic dimension, you can see that the majority of our poor actually belong to rural areas. So you can link it with poverty as well. And with poverty, we'll differentiate between the rural and urban poverty for that matter. Then we're talking about the society, how is it different? The levels of education, yes, the level of healthcare can be thought about. Then you can think of the say the modernized, the Western culture that the cities have. So you can talk about culture here. What else is there? The idea of being conservative, so that comes in culture. The impact of religion, you can talk about the significance of religion again, which can be covered with respect to culture. Then what other ideas are there? Yes, great. The structure of family, the idea of caste system, because rather than caste, you would actually want to call it stratification, as we understand it. So rural areas have a different way of stratifying, that is generally caste, whereas in urban areas, the caste system does not matter so much, and it is the class system which prevails. Also, with respect to the institution of family, you can talk about how the size is different, how the composition is different, how the roles with respect to family members are also different. Yes, so the idea of nuclear family, the idea of gender equality with respect to family. So not just family, you can talk about gender equality more or less in the entire society. Great. Now, moving ahead, if we talk about the political structure, yes, okay, so the idea of employment has already been covered. Then how do we identify ourselves? Yes, so which is embedded in the rural and urban culture, that in rural areas, people have a sense of togetherness, people have a sense of being one, whereas in urban areas, it is more about individualism. So the political aspect can be related to Panchayati Raj institutions. Yes, women empowerment has been covered with family, or you can say society. In urban areas, you have different. Then you can talk about, when you understand about society, then you also link it to demography, the idea and various aspects of population. Yes, in rural areas, patriarchy still prevails. Great. The penetration of caste, the levels of technology. Great. Now, with respect to demography, you can talk about population in absolute numbers. Then you can talk about the population density. And then there are other aspects with respect to demography that you might not be able to highlight right now. You can talk about the mortality rates. You can talk about the birth rates, which we will definitely cover with population. So you can also mention those as of now, and we will take them up later with the chapter on population. So birth rates, then mortality rates, and that you understand simply that what can be the reasons behind this. Better healthcare, better healthcare facilities, better levels of nutrition, etc. The employment has already been covered. Ilma, rather than using the sociological term of mechanical solidarity, it's better because this is GS paper and you are expected to write simpler answers. So the way we have expressed it in simpler language, saying that there is a sense of individualism with respect to urban areas, and whereas in villages or the rural areas, it is still community living that prevails. So it is better to put it simply and not use say sociological terms in GS paper, because I've seen that a lot of you are actually from sociology background. And what happens generally is that one, in GS it is not required, obviously, because the questions are not posed like that. Another idea is that the evaluator would think that you have sociology background and they'll expect more from you. So we have to understand the nature of GS paper and optional paper and answer differently. So the way we do not write answers like GS in the optional paper, it is vice versa as well. It is applicable vice versa. Okay, so the idea of demography, how it is different on the basis of population density, birth rates, mortality rates, sex ratio, etc. Then you talk about the environmental aspect. We talk about environment, and you'll find that the levels of pollution will be different. And not just that, the levels of impact that environment makes will also differ. Because in rural areas, it is primarily agrarian economy. So climate change would have a greater impact on rural areas as compared to urban areas, if you think in terms of agriculture. So similarly, you can talk about land pollution, the levels of land pollution, the levels of, say, water pollution. Now, yes, water is going to get polluted, but the ways are going to be different with respect to rural and urban areas. In rural areas, primarily it is going to be because of your household activities and agriculture, that the entering of pesticides and fertilizers, for that matter, in water. Then when we talk about urban areas, it is going to be primarily because of industrial water pollution, industrial discharge. Okay, so the idea of noise pollution, the idea of light pollution, yes, we feel the difference between rural and urban areas. The dimension of urban heat island, yes, that can also be covered in environment, because with respect to urban areas, you have this phenomena called urban heat island that you would have read in your environment chapters. So vehicle pollution, and then the level of affluence that people are going to have, the level of amenities that you are going to have, the penetration of technology, internet, ICT, all these dimensions can be talked about with respect to differences between rural and urban areas. So the idea is, why we did this exercise again, the idea is when you have to look into differences, changes, you look at various dimensions, various aspects. The way we did it yesterday, we're doing similar exercise. So rather than writing, starting to write altogether, it is better. And again, the types of questions that you see, you have to be careful, because, for example, about the question of diversity and pluralism, most of the students end up writing just about diversity, whereas the question has asked about both diversity and pluralism. So with respect to questions as well, you have to be careful that how you understand the demand of the question. Okay, so you can talk about slums. Yes, those things are done. You're talking about cultural differences, already mentioned. It is because not just religion, the way we eat, the foods we eat, the way we dress, etc., etc. So these ideas can be talked about. Now let's move on to urbanization, because we see that in India there has been a definite transition from rural way of living towards urban way of living. And if you look at the numbers, according to census 2011, it was around 30% that India has been urbanized. But the newer surveys and newer reports indicate that it is to the level of more than 50%. Now again, we have to wait, for that matter, for the results, or because initially the first thing is that the census 21 counting has to start, the process has to start, and then they have to come out with a report. But the indication of various reports and satellite images says that we are moving towards more than 50 to 60% India being urbanized. Now, the idea of urban, you have understood that what is this idea of urban? How is it different from rural areas? Now, let's talk about this process of urbanization, which has been ever increasing. Because if we see, the graph has been linear or biased towards urbanization. So, urbanization is a process through which cities grow. Higher and higher percentages of population comes to live in the city. So, the spread, the extent of city grows. For example, if you talk about any city, talk about Bangalore. Now, Bangalore being a small city previously, with expansion in service sector, you see Bangalore spreading and say spreading 40, 50 kilometers outside. So, this was Bangalore. With time, it has been increasing. Similarly, you can talk about other cities like Mumbai or Delhi, that the cities are increasing. Also, when we talk urban, when we say urban, generally we tend to relate urbanization to these big cities who have a lot of population. But again, you have to understand that it is not these big cities that is the only idea of urban. Yes, these big cities can be an example of over-urbanization. And another question with respect to peculiar phenomena in India, as urbanization can be understood, you can think about whether Indian cities, whether India is over-urbanized, right? So this growth in cities, the spread of cities, and then the growth of population in cities can be termed as urbanization. Urbanization can also be considered as a subset of development, because development, when you look at it, relates to various dimensions of life. And do not worry, development will be again covered in a little more detail. So development, you see, it is about development in various aspects of life, development in or growth in betterment in standard of living, with respect to health, with respect to education, with respect to employment. And urbanization can be understood as a subset of development, because in urban areas, you see that we have better planned cities, we have better amenities as compared to rural areas. Now, how do we define urban in India, or how do we define cities? What are these urban areas? According to Census 2011, urban areas are basically classified into statutory, census, towns, and outgrowths. Now, to understand it simply, when we talk about a statutory town, all the places with municipality, corporation, cantonment boards, and or notified town area committees can be considered as statutory towns. Statutory means by a statute, by law. So generally, state governments classify the cities, classify the urban areas as statutory towns. The notification has to come from the state government. Then there are other types of towns, because you see that not all the towns would have a statutory status for that matter. Then doing census, while counting, while talking to people, while interviewing people, we find that there are a lot of places where the population is more, where the population density is high, wherein people, more and more people, are engaged in activities other than agriculture. So on the basis of that, you have census towns wherein the population exceeds 5,000. The minimum population density is 400 persons per kilometer, and at least 75% of the working population is employed outside agricultural sector. So you can understand, because again, population density, and your economic activity, that is agriculture, are again the factors which differentiate between rural and urban. Then apart from this, you also have outgrowth. So there is the city, and city have a way of pushing outwards. Cities have a way of growing. You talk about your city, you think about your city. The city has been expanding towards the villages, towards, say, outer areas. Now what happens is, there are few areas, rural or suburban areas, wherein you'll find over a period of time people tend to settle, because the city centers will become very expensive. The cost of living is going to be very high. And what happens is that people tend to move outwards because of cheaper rates, etc. Those factors we'll look into. And now what happens is, in that process, that those areas that are outside the city, they started growing as well, in terms of better healthcare facilities, in terms of better education, in terms of better planning of the city, of those areas. And those areas look similar or look like a part of the city. So they do not so much feel like they are, say, rural areas. They become more or less part of the cities, because they have various facilities like educational institutions, proper drainage system, car roads, medical facilities, etc. So these are termed as outgrowths. Outgrowth means the cities, when they are pushing their limits outwards, the areas which get impacted and which get modernized and urbanized. Apart from this, there is one more aspect of satellite towns, which you can understand as, so whenever we go for satellite imaging, we see that there'll be a lot more areas apart from these statutory census and outgrowths, which will have a nature of, which will have a density of urban areas. They are called satellite towns. Now, they are not defined basically by our census, but I'm giving you an idea, because when I'm saying that the urban areas are expanding, the level of urbanization is increasing in India, it is again with respect to those satellite imaging results as well, in which you see that the areas have been expanding, the populations have been growing in a lot many areas. So this is the idea of, you can just ignore this because this has been covered. This is the idea of urban areas in India. Now, what are the factors that impact urbanization? So the factors that we used in terms of differentiating between rural and urban areas are the ones which I mentioned here. So those factors like population and population density, the demographical aspect. Then we can talk about amenities. What kind of amenities are present there? Then what is the major occupation? It should be outside of agriculture. The local self-government, and also what impacts is historical reasons. Now, when we looked at urban and rural, we were trying to differentiate between the features of urban and rural. But these have to be understood as factors of urbanization. Now, let's take them up one by one. When we talk about population and population density, the way population density increases, the levels of urbanization increase, as we have already understood. Because more and more people, as they come to cities to live, you have to provide better healthcare, you have to provide better education. So the cities will grow in the sense of amenities, the cities will grow in terms of population and demography. Then if we talk about amenities, one, it is linked to population growth. Another thing is, so think about an area which was previously rural, but because of, say, setting up of an industry there, or setting up of, say, warehouses there, it'll start growing. Say some place in outskirts of Delhi, they'll set up warehouses there because airport is nearby. Now what will happen is, more and more people will start going there. So you can understand this process in terms of outgrowth. So more and more people will start going there, start living there, because of which amenities will be provided either by the state or by private players. Then the population density, because of this better planning, because of cheaper rates, the population density will go on increasing, and ultimately it will get an urban outlook. Then the idea of occupation, as occupation changes, as the primary occupation of an area changes, the levels of urbanization change. Think about moving from rural to industrial, and then from industrial to service sector. And also you'll see that when we talk about India, the process is different. The process is slightly different as compared to other say countries. Our experience of urbanization is different. So that's why we are taking up one or the other dimension, so that you have that idea in mind. How is it going to be different? So you can think about India in terms of industrial growth and your growth of service sector. Then we talk about the government, local self-government. This can be traced with historical aspect as well, historical dimension as well. Take historical first. Take for example, the capital of the Mughals. Talk about Delhi. Talk about Agra. How the cities have been urbanized because of historical reasons. Because when it becomes the center of trade, because previously it was not manufacturing, but it was generally trade. So there'll be people who will make handicrafts. There'll be people who will make other things, and the level of trades will be higher compared to rural areas. That's how urban centers were located previously. Then again, they'll have better planning, because think about ancient cities. Think about Harappa. Right? So from there you can understand that how it was different with contemporary other areas, that it had better planning, it had better amenities, etc. Then historically, you talk about how there has been a different impact of various kingdoms. So you can talk about, say, Mughals. Then later on, if you move towards colonial phase, you see cities like Madras coming up and getting urbanized. With respect to government as well, the way the governance system is, it impacts your urbanization as well. So if it is under, in aspect of infrastructure, yes, infrastructure is again there with amenities. And also, when you talk about geographical factors, you think of demography, and with demography comes your population and population density. And also, because till now you haven't covered the chapter on population, you're maybe not able to relate, but you'll relate soon, because we're going to take a migration with urbanization, wherein you'll understand that how your geographical areas impact population and population density. Historical reasons, think about your cities like Delhi, which have been historically city centers, which have been historically capital cities. So population density, as already discussed in rural and urban areas, is different. Population density is higher in urban areas. So these are various factors which affect the growth of urbanization. Now, urbanization, again, when I'm saying urbanization has to be understood as a process in terms of socio-cultural process. How is it a socio-cultural process? The idea of people from various diverse culture coming and living together. The idea of interaction and exchange of traits between cultures. Because don't you think this is how it is different compared to rural areas? There's a culture mixing experience in urban areas. So as a process, the more we have diversity, so the more we move towards city, you'll find that the more diversity you'll have. There'll be more and more interaction and exchange of cultural traits between people. So that's how it's a social cultural process. And also with respect to the social dimension, you can talk about the size and composition of family as a structure. You can talk about other social structures, say of stratification. You can talk about your healthcare, education, etc. So the growth in these dimensions can be related to urbanization as a social cultural process. Then we talk about urbanization as an economic process. So the more we move towards industries, the more we move towards the service sector, the more we see we have urbanized. So urbanization as an economic process can be understood as industrialization and the growth of service sector. Social institutions have already been covered, have already been mentioned. Now, as a geographical process, one is with respect to your demographic factors. That if you want to understand urbanization as a geographical process, it is increase in population, it is increase in population density, it is your mortality rates getting better, it is your sex ratio getting better. Then as a political administrative process, you can think of urbanization in terms of the way your municipal committees are set up, municipal corporations are set up. So how they're different from your panchayati raj institutions, and how there is a definite transition over a period of time. If you look at any urban area, any area becoming urban, you'll find that the more the population increases, the more the better or the or more sophisticated system of governance you would have to go for. So whereas in rural areas you have simpler political administrative processes, in urban areas you'll have more complex and complicated processes. Then one more thing that you have to understand is that urbanization is more or less an irreversible process. Now we'll come to the how these dimensions interplay with each other. Before that, think of urbanization as an irreversible process. If you want to think of urbanization as an irreversible process, you would have to see what are various aspects of urbanization. So one is the growth of cities, another one is the growth of population in cities. So do you think that once the amenities are set up, can they be reversed? Once the population density has increased, can it be reversed? And if yes, what can be the examples or exceptions? What can be the examples of exceptions? So yes, some are saying yes, it is not a reversible process. Okay, great. So you have exceptions of COVID. We'll come to that. Then can there be other factors of urban to rural migration? It can be related to deindustrialization, and also suggest some example for that. Can there be other factors? Layoffs has been discussed, so that can be say economic idea of it. But again, we are talking about reversing the process of urbanization, because if layoffs happen, it'll be limited to an organization, because it would not have that kind of impact for that matter. The way COVID-19 migration had because of the lockdown. Disaster, yes, any disaster can have a very great impact. Disaster, and you can relate it with environmental change as well. Now, but again, what you have to understand is when you talk about this migration back from urban areas to rural areas, or rather thinking of urbanization as a reversible process, you have to understand that it has to sustain. Now, if we talk about COVID, people went back to rural centers. Yes, for a period of time, it looked like that the process of urbanization is getting reversed. That a lot more people are moving out. The population in urban areas is decreasing. But did it sustain? No, people started coming back. So the process of urbanization did not get reversed. Similarly, in terms of disaster, right now Delhi is under floods because of Yamuna River. So yes, a lot of people would be made to say shift or migrate to other areas to get rid of that. But you'll find that it is not going to sustain, because there have been other disasters as well. And once everything is normal, people start coming back. So the process does not get reversed. The broader process of urbanization doesn't get reversed. But again, you have historical examples wherein cities were wiped out. You can talk about your cities like Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, right? So when you talk about reversing this process of urbanization, you have to see that it has to sustain. But now we see that in modern times, at least, we see that it has become an irreversible process. Previously, yes, it could have been reversible. So the example of Harappa, where it can be thought of as reversible, and you remember that I've written it as exceptions, but these are not exceptions. Why? Because these processes, these issues did not sustain. So when you talk about exceptions, you can talk about ancient idea. Then you can also talk about a country getting impacted, because the movie is in news, so maybe you should have related to that by now. Oppenheimer is in news, so I think it's screening. It got started screening last week, so you should have related to your cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it can be in terms of nuclear disaster. So I think nuclear disasters are the one. Yes, disasters, it is there, but you'll find that generally with disasters, normal disasters, the process is reversible, that they go back to cities again. Now, also what you have to see is when you look at process of urbanization, you will not have to compartmentalize again. Yes, Chernobyl. What you have to do is that you have to look at each of these processes impacts each other, because if the population increases, there'll be a definite impact on economic processes. There'll be a definite impact on, say, your employment. Then again, if there is a change in population, there is a demographic change, increase in population density, issues like slums, urban slums will come up. Issues with respect to fight for resources. Then again, change in your administrative process. Then the process would have to become more complex. So these factors, these processes have to be looked at urbanization as a social-cultural, political, economic, etc. process together, because all these factors have an interplay between each of them. So when we talked about causes of urbanization, we said Either it can be population growth in urban areas. How would population grow? One thing that we have to see. Another thing is it can also be understood as migration from rural to urban areas. So how do cities become cities, or how do cities grow? People migrating from rural to urban areas to those cities in search of employment, in search of a better lifestyle, in search of better educational opportunities. The another idea is that people who are already living there, they are also going to procreate, they are also going to give birth to children, and that's how the population will grow. So these two causes, these two dimensions we have to talk about. So if we talk about population growth, one thing is it has to be linked to your fertility rates and your birth rates. Now these two dimensions will be covered in your chapter on population, but you can understand simply saying that if the birth rates are higher in the cities, the population will grow more. Very simple. But what here we are going to take up is migration. So migration from rural to urban areas, which contributes to urbanization. So migration is people moving in or out of a country, place, or a region. So migration can be inwards or migration can be outwards. Now when we talk about migration in India, we generally see we have rural to urban migration. Now before moving to India, you can understand what can be the various factors of migration. What are those factors which will impact migration? Why would someone want to migrate to urban areas? So it can be simply understood in terms of better economic opportunities, in terms of not having enough or not having enough resources in rural areas. That's why people would want to move to urban areas. Then you can think of migration in terms of disasters. If there is a natural calamity in your area happening, you would tend to migrate to some other area. Then it can be considered in terms of seasonal migration, like harsh climatic conditions for some part of the year. Just think about an example of this seasonal migration as well. Then there can be discrimination with respect to a social group, discrimination with respect to a religion, with respect to a caste, with respect to a sexual orientation, and because of which you would want to live in a more, say, liberal environment. What would you do? You would migrate. Then there can be political reasons. Political reasons like there can be political instability, because you see in the countries where there is political instability, people tend to move out. So there can be various dimensions, there can be various factors on the basis of which people migrate. Now these factors on the basis of which people migrate are classified as either push factors or pull factors. And yes, everyone is contributing to this discussion because this is very simple and has been already discussed in geography. So we are not going to get into greater details, but the issues associated with it. So just to give a basic idea, because there might be a few who would not have covered geography by now. So there are few factors out of these factors of migration which tend to push someone out of rural areas, or push someone out of one particular area. The another dimension is that these factors can pull you towards urban life. The idea of better education, healthcare, better economic opportunities is something that pulls you towards urban areas. The idea of better lifestyle, the idea of freedom pulls you towards urban areas. Then there are other factors which push you towards other areas. For instance, political instability. For instance, social discrimination. For instance, landlessness. Because if someone doesn't have enough land, they would tend to move towards urban areas or tend to move towards industrial areas to get better economic opportunities because they do not have educated resources in the village. Then again, you can relate it with migration, which happens because of government policies. You can think of government taking up an area to construct some things, any public infrastructure, to construct railway lines, to construct dams. That can also contribute to migration, and that will be something that will push you outside that area. Then also you can think of pollution or climate change, disasters, political instability, social tensions. Because recently in news you would have seen that it is not of that scale, but yes, certain migration has happened from Uttarakhand, within Uttarakhand though, from some areas where there were social tensions, where there were communal tensions. Yes, there was no communal violence as such, but there were communal tensions, and there was a probability of things happening. So people migrated from those areas. So so migration can be understood as push and pull migration. Now migration contributes to growth of cities. Now if we talk about the consequences of migration, you have to understand in two ways. You have to understand the impact of migration on the area from which you have migrated. So this is the area from which a person is migrating towards this area. Now this migration is going to impact both the areas, and this is what we have to see. Yes, people from Manipur, the social tensions in Manipur as well, the migration that is happening right now, the refugee crisis that you see time and again in various countries because of political and social troubles, the migration because of marriage. Yes. But now the migration that we have, the concept that we have to discuss is what are the consequences of migration, because it is going to impact both the areas. So the first simple thing that happens is if you are moving from this area, the population here will decrease and the population here will increase. Simple. The population density here from the area which you migrate will decrease and the population density here will increase. What is this? Now, because of this change in various aspects of population, you'll see that things like sex ratio can change. Take example of Bihar. From Bihar, you will find that most of the a lot of working male population, that male population who is in the working age bracket, they migrate to other areas in search of work. The reasons are multiple. One, there are no better opportunities, economic opportunities in the rural areas in Bihar. Then there is landlessness, poverty, because of which people tend to migrate. Now, if a lot of working age male people are moving out of the cities or out of the rural areas, what happens to the sex ratio? Because you see that the sex ratio will tend to increase. Sex ratio tends to increase. So one aspect is demographic aspect, which impacts other dimensions. Also, the birth rate might get low. There is no say evidence as such, but if you see that there's a husband and wife living together and it is only the husband who migrates, then one, sex ratio gets impacted. Also, the birth rates tend to go low. Now, migration, this is just one instance wherein it will make changes, because migration can be that you are migrating with your family, with your children and everyone. So one is demographic aspect, that the population density and the population changes of both the areas. Now, this was the impact on the area from which you have migrated, that the population density is going low. Then who you will need someone for agriculture, right? Who will take up labor? What happens to the role of women? What happens to the elderly? What happens to the children? So various other dimensions which we'll cover one by one. So there are two ways of doing it. One way is think about the area from which a person has migrated and what happens to various dimensions or aspects of life. Or other way is classify them into various say dimensions and look at them. So let's start with this method itself. So if we talk about population going down, population density decreasing, you'll find that there'll be less and less number of people to take up economic activities. Then, if you talk about, say, decrease in population as well, the another idea about population is that various demographic factors with respect to birth rate, death rate, etc., change as well. Now, again, it will be dependent on which section of the society is moving out. Now, because if the migration is because of social tensions, then it will lead to decrease in diversity, right? If someone is moving to look for economic opportunities, then it is going to impact the institution of family. It is going to nuclearize the families there. The joint family will break down. So, in these terms, it can be understood. Similarly, when you move towards some area, when you migrate to some area, the population density there increases. What happens to your needs of basic infrastructure like housing, water, food to eat, a job, a secure job? So all these dimensions get impacted. Let's look at them one by one. So the demographic changes, I think you would have understood by now. If we talk about social changes like the changes in the institution of family, family is getting nuclear. Then you can talk about the consequences of migration as in terms of social changes as the change in the diversity with respect to areas. That you'll have people from various cultures coming in, migrating to a city, for instance. You'll find that the social changes that happen are that you'll have a better experience of different cultures. There is going to be certain homogenization because people tend to adopt similar cultures. Then there can be cultural assimilation and acculturation that can be simply understood as people getting, so one is acculturation, wherein people tend to adopt cultural practices of other cultures. What is this idea? Another idea is the idea of assimilation. Now, assimilation means getting assimilated or acquiring cultural traits of the majority culture. You'll find, just think about the urban way of living. Forget about various other majority cultures that you can also find in terms of assimilation of tribals in the, say, in Hindus, for that matter. You can see that it is because of assimilation into the majority culture. Think about urban areas. Think about urban culture. There is a difference in culture. There is a difference in your rural and urban experience. So people getting assimilated, people coming from rural areas, getting assimilated into this urban culture, losing their cultural or losing their rural identity and getting assimilated into the urban culture. So these can be various social changes. Apart from this, you are talking about social tension that might happen because of various different people from different cultures, different walks of life coming in. The social tension can also happen because of the fight for resources. Because if the cities are overcrowded, overburdened, you find that you have less and less economic opportunities. And you find that this you have seen in the US elections, in the previous US elections as well. And this is a normal thing that people tend to blame the migrants, people from that area tend to blame the migrants for stealing their jobs, for instance. So that can also lead to social tension or social conflicts. So yes, the issues with diversity can also be linked here. What can be the issues with diversity? People not able to accept each other, social tensions on rise, etc. Yes, your culture, change in your culture, change in your dressing, etc. has already been covered here. Then we talk about remittances, because if a person has moved from here to here, say his family lives there, his parents are there in this area itself, he'll be sending back money. He'll earn something in the urban areas. Think about a person who's migrated to urban area. He's earning some money in urban area. He got an economic opportunity. He takes his expenditure. He has to pay on rent, food, health, etc. And the rest of the money he sends it across to his family, his parents, his wife living in the rural area. Now, this money that is moving from the place where he has migrated to the place from where he has migrated is what is remittance. So there'll be a component of remittances. So when we said that people, if they move out of a certain area, the area from which people migrate, this gets impacted economically. It gets impacted economically in the sense now there are less and less number of people to take up economic opportunities. But also in terms of remittances, you'll find a positive impact on their economic state. Adopt culture traits of other cultures, people from other cultures. Then you talk about economic growth and underdevelopment. Now what happens is economic growth and underdevelopment is related to both the sides. So what happens is the area from which people are migrating, and generally in India you see it is rural to urban migration. Yes, there is a certain component of urban to urban migration as well, and you find exceptions in the sense you find urban to rural migration as well. Urban to rural migration, one idea is you think about people losing their jobs. Another idea is people not finding any economic opportunity or the standard of living being poor, because of which people moving from urban to rural areas. Then another idea is affluent people moving from urban to rural areas, because what happens is because of the degrading environment across the country, across the globe of the cities, people who have the money, people who have the resources tend to move towards rural areas. They would not mind coming in for work to the urban areas, but they would want to stay, they would want to live, they would want to experience that rural culture. And again, if you talk about urban to urban migration, person moving from a small city to a bigger city, then also people moving from Bangalore to Delhi, that is also a component of migration. But when we see that what is the form of migration which has the most important impact on society, that is we see rural to urban migration, and that is what we are discussing. I hope this is clear. So you do not have to look at migration primarily in the sense of rural to urban. There are other forms of migration as well, but you have to see that the consequences that rural to urban migration has on the cities is very significant. So these cities will get overcrowded in the sense there will be a lot of population density, which will lead to a problem with respect to housing, a problem with respect to clean drinking water, etc. The issues that are related to planning that will again come in the future. Then these cities will be overburdened in terms of more and more pressure on the resources. They have finite resources, but a lot of people are coming. A lot of people are coming asking for houses. A lot of people are coming asking for economic opportunities, clean drinking water, proper sewage planning. So these are the issues that happen to the area to which you have migrated. Then when we talk about economic growth will happen in the area to which you have migrated. Why? Because you contribute to economic activities. Also, what happens to the area from which you have migrated, they do not have as many people to work for, to find economic opportunities or to engage in economic activities. And these areas will get underdeveloped. And that's how you see, if you feel, in terms of rural and urban areas, the kind of amenities that are there, you'll find are now getting similar. In urban and rural areas, the kind of amenities that we get are almost tending towards similarity. They are similar. But you see that the rural areas are not able to economically justify those changes. They do not have, say, a huge contribution to the GDP for that matter. They do not have sufficient resources, and that's where, in form of rural development, the state has to step in. The state has to push in money to develop these rural areas. Then another idea of underdevelopment is, because of a lot of people moving to this area, moving to the city, you'll find that there'll be a struggle for economic opportunities. There'll be a struggle for housing, clean water, educational opportunities, which will lead to rise of slums, which will lead to more and more people getting pushed into poverty. And this is how you can see the impact of migration, as one way was development and the other way is underdevelopment. So underdevelopment of the area from which you have migrated, also underdevelopment of the area to which you have migrated. So I hope this idea is clear. Example of remittance, or how remittance impacts is, think about you living in Delhi, working in a corporate, earning some money, using some money for your expenses, but then remitting some money, remitting the leftover part, or remitting according to the needs of your family, sending that money to your home, transferring it to your father's bank account, to your mother's bank account. What is that? Remittance. How is it impacting? Now it's not just, so in terms of the purchasing power, if you see, people in rural areas also will have more purchasing power, because compared to what they can take out of agriculture, how much they can earn from agriculture, or any other economic activity that is there in rural areas, you'll see that this money that they get in form of remittance will be considerable. Again, there'll be different cases, because a lot of rural poor migrate as well, who will never get a chance to work for a, say, big company, big organization. But to relate, you can understand it as money flowing in from the area to which you have migrated. Then you can talk about alienation, or you can think of it as isolation. Now, the students who are from sociology do not understand it completely as the Marxist idea of alienation, but you have to understand simply is, you are moving from rural to urban area. Think about it. You do not know anyone in rural areas, or in your city, you knew people. People knew you because of your family name, because of your peer group. Now, if you're moving to a new area, people do not know you. You do not have anyone to talk to, apart from your colleagues, that sooner or later are going to become your friends, or your friends from school. But initially, you do not know anyone. And think about someone from the working class, someone working in an industry. They will not have a peer group. They will not have anyone to talk to. And then the individualism, the idea of individualism that has already been discussed in the cities, makes you feel separated, makes you feel isolated, makes you feel alienated. So that is what the idea of alienation is. So this sense of isolation, the sense of being separate from the rest, the sense of not being taken care of, is the idea of alienation. Think of rural poor who migrate to urban areas in search of better economic opportunities, or at least something to get out of their poverty cycle, and not finding anything, and made to stay in slums, made to beg on the say, your traffic signals. They feel they have a sense of alienation. They do not feel that they belong to the rest of the society, and generally the affluent society. So the idea of alienation. Now, this idea of alienation is again not restricted to poor. It can be. It happens otherwise as well. Yes, the alienation you are talking about, not have to think about that alienation. That's what I meant, because again, that's sociological understanding of it, and we are using it in simple terms. Now, there'll be a definite impact on various sections of the society. The elderly get impacted, women get impacted, children get impacted. Just think simply. If you move from rural, and again, when we are talking about this, our tilt is more towards rural to urban migration. So think about children who move from rural to urban areas with their parents. Now they have better economic opportunities, educational facilities, they have better healthcare facilities, right? Similarly, if you talk about women tend to move towards empowerment, because now they can, with rising level of education, they can get into work, they can pick up some job, contribute to the economic security of the family. So the composition of the family, the power structure of the family also changes. The size of the family also changes, in the sense that people have moved from joint to nuclear families. The elderly get impacted in the sense that, one is the elderly who are living in the rural areas, who have been left behind in the rural areas, who takes care of their social security, etc. needs, the need for health, the need for education. Then the elderly who are in the cities, they also find themselves more and more isolated, because they do not, the idea of alienation can be linked with elderly as well. The idea of alienation being that they do not feel connected to people, they do not have anyone to talk to, who takes care of their emotional needs, etc. So these are various consequences of migration. And again, you do not have to stop here, because if you talk about the social changes, you can talk about the new institutions that come up, new social institutions that come up, right? The change from caste system to class system. Then this the idea of discrimination on the basis of your class, right? In cities, the way you find caste divide in the rural areas, you find class divide in urban areas. So people live in different, the people from different classes live in various watertight compartments, wherein there is limited interaction. So think about someone from an affluent family, they would have, say, someone to drive their car. Now that is the only limited interaction that they'll have. Otherwise, they live separately. So the affluent or the rich of the cities, they have a different lifestyle. Their idea of urban is different, and the urban poor, their idea is different. So I hope this is clear. This is something that you have understood. So migration is going to impact both the cities. Now, if we talk about migration trends in India, as already discussed, generally you find the majority of migration is rural to urban migration. So Sneha is asking, and it's a relevant question, that how do we remember so many examples? Because after a few days, everything will fade away. Now the thing is, Sneha, and others as well, it applies to everyone, that the discussion that we are having here is for your conceptual clarity. You have to understand the concept. Examples will follow. You do not have to remember the examples. You have to understand the concept. If you understand the concept, you can fit in examples as how you want. Another thing is, if you are struggling with something, if you're struggling with a concept, be patient, revise after the class is over. And when you revise, you'll find that a lot of things that were maybe not very clear previously will become clear. And also during revision, you try to mention a couple of examples with respect to these concepts, so that you have everything. Because there might be a few things wherein you'll find difficult to locate examples, right? But if you emphasize on conceptual clarity, this problem is not going to bother you at all. This is not going to be a problem at all. Yes, so Ilma is also suggesting a consequence of migration being social crimes. Yes, so do not worry that yes, there are a lot of things that are left behind, and particularly the negative aspects. And what we are going to do is, as we have said, that in India, the migration is a little different compared to others. How is it? That is something that we have to see. And also the problem of over-urbanization, because I asked you a question initially, whether India is over-urbanized. So these questions will be discussed, these questions will be answered, and therein you'll find a little more points with respect to this. So migration trends in India, it is generally rural to urban migration, but at times you find exceptions. When you find exceptions, the exceptions that we discuss with migration, in cases of disaster, in cases of say natural calamities, or say take example of COVID, right? So those examples you can take. Yeah, so you are trying to answer the question of over urbanized, talking about metropolitan areas, talking about unplanned cities coming up, etc. Yes, these are the aspects, these are the dimensions that we are going to cover. Now let's look at a few trends or data with respect to urbanization in India. Now if we talk about India, you'll see that more than 30% of your population now is considered urban. But again, what I've said is, with newer reports coming in, they are trying to say that this is more than 50%. Now we don't have sufficient evidence to support this fact right now, but let's wait for newer data to come. Let's wait for more reliable reports to come so that we can choose that. But yes, even your sample survey has highlighted that the urban population, the spread of urbanization is increasing in India. Rate of growth of urban population, you can see that every year close to 3% of the urban population increases. But still, if we talk about India, what you can say is that India is still agrarian. India is still rural. Looking at this data, because still the most of our population is located in rural areas. So we can say that Indian urbanization is different in the sense that, because if you look at Western countries, the level of urbanization is they're close to say 50%, 70%, 80%, 90% urbanized. The level of urbanization is more. But in India, you'll find that it is less than the Western countries. Also, the distribution is not equitable. Not every area has been urbanized to that extent. Now, if we talk about regional differences, you'll find that the southern state of Tamil Nadu, and that you know, that is mostly because of your industries and service sector, that is more urbanized compared to other states. Then Goa is also 62% urbanized. If you talk about Delhi, it is the most urbanized union territory. The least urbanized state, and it would be no wonder, is Himachal Pradesh. Why? Difficult terrain. Difficult terrain in the sense, Himalayan state, and it's not very easy to urbanize such areas. Then again, it is followed by Bihar, Assam, Odisha. And the reasons you see there is poverty, lack of say rural development, the impact of rural development. Because take example of Haryana and compare it with say Bihar. Now, because of green revolution, you have seen the kind of changes that have happened, the level of urbanization that happened, that followed because they had the resources from the impacts or from the positive consequences of green revolution, and later it got industrialized, and there is a definite growth in service sector. And you compare it with Bihar, and now the idea is again historical as well, and administrative reasons as well. Now, if you look into the question of how is it peculiar in the case of India, how is it different, how is it specific, the way we were discussing the salient features of Indian society, we have to talk about the peculiar phenomena of urbanization that it is in India. So generally you find in the Western countries that urbanization started with industrialization, the rapid growth in urbanization, because we cannot say that it was with industrialization that urbanization happened. Think about this. Think about various cities that we had before industrialization saw rapid growth. So we still had cities. Why? Because they were primarily trading centers. So from agrarian, so the rural economy was always primarily agrarian, but the urban centers were initially, say, they were trading centers. Then there was a shift towards industrialization, because again, if you talk about industrialization does not necessarily mean urbanization, because industries can be set up in different areas. Industries can be set up in rural areas as well, and that might not lead to say urbanization, right? Because there can be people who migrate from rural area. You take examples. There are various industries that are set up in separate areas. Even in your area, you'll find there are industries in rural areas, and then there you won't find any say other aspects, other amenities or other social structures that you generally connect with urbanization. So generally in the West, it was because of industrialization, it was because of growth of industries that the growth in urbanization happened, that the process of urbanization deepened. But then you see that in India, it has been tertiary sector-led growth. Tertiary sector, the services sector. So the growth in urbanization in India has happened because this is the demographic data that you can find post-liberalization era, and with the growth in service sector, that more and more of our population started moving towards urban areas with the growth in tertiary sector. Now, generally it is attributed to the communication, transport, services and construction factors or sectors with respect to urbanization. Then you find that it has been manufacturing sector in various other countries, in other developed countries, whereas in India it is different. Also, the regional differences that we have in India, regional differences with respect to levels of urbanization. For instance, southern India, you'll find that they are the ones who got industrialized because of various reasons, because of availability of resources. Other historical reasons is that it was generally the south of the country, because it was either the western or the eastern coast, wherein you had ports, and from where things or various products, raw materials, etc., were traded to different countries. So it has been a hub of export in the country, because it is way later that the means of say, air transport started increasing and they became cheaper. So much so that they can take care of our logistic and transport. But otherwise, it was generally through ports that most of the trade used to happen. So one is that historical reason. Another thing is, because of these aspects, they were better developed, they had better infrastructure, the southern states. Not every state, but yes, more or less, they had better infrastructure. And because of which, they were the ones who attracted most of the FDI in initial years. And you see the growth of cities like Bangalore and Chennai back in 90s because of these foreign direct investments. Now, this is how it is different. Because otherwise, you'll find that it is generally equitable. You would not find a lot of, say, differences with respect to urbanization. Because if you compare Bihar with Tamil Nadu, the levels of urbanization are completely different. They are on different ends. And this kind of disparity, these kind of differences you would not find in other societies. Then the idea of over-urbanization, that the urbanization in India is considered to be pseudo-urbanization. Why? Because the big cities, something that someone had suggested, I forgot the name, who had suggested about metropolitan area. So one idea is that because of most of our population, a large section of our population moving towards these big cities, leading to a collapse in the various aspects of urban life, various urban services, basic amenities. And this is where you can see that India's urbanization can be understood as over-urbanization. And herein you can see that one is you will have ideas with respect to what are the issues with respect to urbanization, what kind of issues that come up. And then you will also think about what can be the possible solutions. What are the issues that are coming up with urbanization, and what are the possible solutions to the same? This is something that you might get in your mind. So with that, what we'll do is we'll enter into effects of urbanization. But let's do one thing, because this is something that will go on for some time. This discussion will go on for a longer time. Then what we can do is we can take a break. But before that, what is pseudo urbanization? Pseudo is something not true. Pseudo is something that can be considered as not true. Now, whereas in West you'll find the developed countries that the urbanization has a more or less equal spread. But whereas in India, it is not the case. So in those terms, you can understand it as pseudo urbanization. Other thing is, because I would have discussed it later, but it's okay. I'll discuss it right away. Other thing is pseudo in the sense because with urbanization we attach the idea of better amenities, we attach the idea of better lifestyle, we attach the idea of better social security, better economic opportunities. At the same time, if you look at the state of Indian cities, and particularly the big cities, you'll find problems related to slums. Do you think the lifestyle that was expected, the lifestyle that is expected by one who's living in urban areas, do you think he would anytime be able to relate to these slums in which people dwell? Right? Similarly, you will not have the public infrastructure that should have been there. Where is the strong, say, public transportation system? So this is in these terms, India's urbanization can be considered not true, pseudo. Yes, in maths, because yes, words change their meaning. So Hariom is saying that in math we understand pseudo as different. Yes, so words change meaning in various contexts, right? So this idea of pseudo urbanization, how India is over urbanized, and how this urbanization is not true, I have given you a glimpse of it. But what we'll do is, after a short break, we'll take up all these dimensions and discuss them one by one, and we'll try to take up a question as well. Okay, so let's take a break here, and let's meet at 7:57 and continue our discussion. No, there cannot be a 20-minute break. Let's meet back at 7:57. Welcome back. So we're discussing about various consequences of migration, and now we move on to effects of urbanization. So we have discussed how it is a different phenomena compared to the West in India, and how it is a pseudo phenomena as well. Pseudo in terms of overburdening of cities, in terms of not having sufficient or good enough amenities, etc. So those issues, etc. will cover. Now, when we talk about effects of urbanization, effects can be always both positive and negative. That is something we have to understand. Another thing is, when we talk about effects, we have to also consider various sections. We have to also consider various sections of the society on whom urbanization can have an impact. So various sections will primarily talk about the elderly, women, and children. Also, if we talk about the effects or changes, we are always looking into social institutions. That how any social change that is happening in the society affects these social institutions. Now, with respect to social institutions first, will you be able to take up this dimension yourself? Because this has been discussed on multiple occasions and has been discussed in detail. So, would you be able to take this up? So, let's frame a question here. And this is a question that you can practice. What is the impact of, I'll frame it simply for you. What is the impact of urbanization on this institution of family? So, this is a question that you can practice and write tomorrow. Because this is something has been discussed multiple times. The idea of nuclear family, the idea of egalitarianism in the family. So change in size, composition, and function as well. So do not forget function. Yes, you can address exactly. So you have to talk about function as well. Not forget function as well. So this is something we can discuss. Then also you can discuss the impact of urbanization on caste system. So can you take up this aspect as well, because this has been discussed. With these two aspects, dimensions, you can consider as your homework. Will you be able to take this up yourself? Yes. So what you do is you take up various features of the caste system and talk about the impact of urbanization on the same. Yes, we can talk about alcoholism, gambling, prostitution, etc. with respect to urbanization, and that is an issue that we'll discuss, because this is generally that you find in urban areas. Yes, the transition from caste to class system, that is also one aspect that you can cover, because we have to tell them that if caste system is changing, how is it changing, what are the changes, and we can also mention that it is transitioning towards caste system. Yes, these have to be taken up the way you took up globalization. And now you see the simpler exercises that we do that at times sound redundant are going to help you, because the same logic can be applied to various dimensions. All you have to learn is just break it down and conceptualize. Now let's talk about the impact of urbanization on women. We had looked into a few aspects of impact of globalization on women. Similarly, we can talk about urbanization. Now here as well, we're going to just break it up for you, because women is the next chapter that we are going to discuss in detail. And when we talk about women, there also the process is same. What was the traditional role of women? How that role has been changing with various forces of globalization, urbanization, modernization, and what are the related issues? This is the way we are going to proceed with them. So here, if we want to talk about women first, what do? You want to look at impact of urbanization on women. There have to be dimensions on which you can talk about the impact. What can be these dimensions? One can be, you also keep suggesting so that you keep thinking as well. You keep storming your brain. It can be social dimension, it can be political dimension as well. And again, when we talk about impact, it can be positive and negative as well. It can be both positive and negative, right? And also you can think about with respect to these three dimensions. Then you can take up the aspect of security that will be covered in social. Then you can take up the aspect of psychology that happens on a personal, individual level. That also will discuss with social, because that is basically a dimension that we do not emphasize a lot when we talk about social issues. Yes, we do take that issue up when we talk about ethics, when we discuss the same issues in ethics. Because if you discuss the same issue of poverty in ethics, you would have to talk about a few psychological dimensions, which generally we just touch upon. For instance, the idea of feeling isolated, or the idea of alienation, or the idea of, say, a culture of poverty. These things are something that we just touch on. Okay, let's start our discussion. Okay, so we are talking about women in terms of various roles that they perform in the society and relating it with urbanization. Okay, so you have already started mentioning. Great. So that in economic dimension, the role of women is changing in the sense, or the role of women with respect to urbanization is now they're engaged in paid labor as well, paid work or paid labor. But also, because of this paid labor, you'll find that there is dual burden on women, because they are the ones who take care of household activities. They are the ones who are taking care of paid labor as well. So they're contributing to the economic and the other security needs of the family. Also, with this change, what happens is that they started working, they start going outside, then they are more vulnerable. Also, they are more vulnerable to various forms of harassment, which can be covered either with social or with economic. Then yes, double role has been covered. Then if we move on to social dimension, in social we can think about the dimension of their status in family, the status in society, then the level of health, and then education, etc. The impact of caste system, etc. Now the levels of education have certainly improved in women if we talk about urban areas. Then also if we talk about health, and particularly in terms of maternal mortality rate, you see that there has been an increase. There has been betterment with respect to health. What does maternal mortality rate? That is something we'll discuss with women, and simply understood, it is the number of women who pass away during their delivery or during pregnancy because of various reasons. Now, if we talk in terms of family, the roles have become more egalitarian, because you can apply the same logic. Now, their role of socialization has changed. It is schools and other special institutions that take care of socialization of children. So, childcare at times is sole responsibility, but yes, at times it is not. Then, crime against women is increasing, and that you can attribute to their that you can attribute again in terms of their work, that they have sexual harassment at workplace, they have harassment at workplace, etc. Then moving on, similarly, you can talk about the political dimension. One, representation in various political institutions. Then another thing is various policies, with levels of awareness, better participation in politics in terms of a voter and a representative, then various policy level changes that governments have brought about. Also, you can talk about the dimension with respect to environment, change in environment. So one idea is that because of climate change, women are becoming more vulnerable. Because of urbanization, because of climate change, women are becoming more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. This is a dimension that will be covered with women. But otherwise, if you understand, you talk about clean cooking fuel. You talk about rural areas, primarily, you'll find that they do not have clean cooking fuel. They do not use, say, your household LPG gas or PNG, that is your natural gas. Rather, they use firewood, which is polluting. One. Another thing is it starts respiratory disorders or diseases in women. So with respect to that, you can think how climate change impacts women will be discussed in the next session, that is on women. Also, if you talk about the role of various pressure groups, self-help groups that you are suggesting, you can talk about them because the reach in urban areas is more, the levels of awareness in urban areas are more. With respect to social, you can also talk about the levels of sanitation. You can talk about the idea of toilet. So which has impacts both sides. So you see that in urban areas you have better amenities with respect to women, but if you talk about the poorer sections, women are more vulnerable. You do not have clean drinking water. You do not have, say, proper waste disposal mechanisms. And also in terms of villages, you find that you do not have, say, tertiary healthcare centers. Not most, but a lot of deliveries are still carried out outside institutional facilities, that is outside hospitals. Deliveries being carried out at home, etc. With respect to the social setup, with respect to the idea of patriarchy that is prevalent, with respect to the mindset that people have in rural areas, things have changed in urban areas as well. Along with this, there are a few more things that have to be discussed, but let's keep them for our next chapter, that is role of women and the changing role of women. So I hope you got a fair idea how urbanization impacts women. Other thing is, a few other dimensions will be covered in the next session on the role of women. Now, also what we can talk about is urbanization and children. Here as well, we talk about various dimensions of the life of children. What can be these? So one is they would not have political, because yes, there can be different policies that are there because of government that the government is coming up with. But otherwise, you look at the aspect of education that are basically socio-economic factors you can write. So someone suggesting that women make enormous contributions to economies, whether in businesses, on farms, as entrepreneurs or employees, taking care of unpaid care work at home, but they also remain disproportionately affected by poverty, discrimination, and exploitation. Yes, they do, and it can be attributed to various factors. It can be thought of in terms of feminization of poverty, because I think that's where you are indicating, because you have primarily written about the economic aspect. But there are other social disabilities as well, which have to be talked about. And yes, this is something that we are going to discuss with women. But this is a good observation that you have made here. Yes. So with respect to education, health, think of child labor. So we follow the same norm. I think we have done this in the chapter of globalization. And that's what we'll do again. Now, in urban areas also, what we can see is now these dimensions get impacted by various factors. Think about health. Your pollution will impact health, right? Then your levels of nutrition will impact health. Now, with respect to nutrition, the levels of awareness of your family will matter a lot, because if your father is not aware what is nutritious, what is not, if the level of awareness is poor, then you cannot expect them to provide you good nutrition. Then if we talk about health in terms of the presence of healthcare facilities, now because of high population density, vulnerability with respect to various kind of diseases that spread in the cities. Then we talk about child labor, and you think about these dimensions simultaneously, that your health, they'll get better healthcare facilities in urban areas. But again, the issue is one aspect is positive, that is better healthcare. The other aspect is negative. They are not affordable, right? Similarly, if we talk about the levels of pollution, which is only negative for that matter, which think about air pollution, which impacts, because children for that matter are more vulnerable compared to adults, because their immunity system has not grown to or not strengthened to that extent. So they are more vulnerable to issues with respect to pollution, etc. Yes, we'll come to the social dimension. Let's cover the idea of health first. If you talk about nutrition, one is increased levels of awareness with respect to nutrition contributes to good health. But at the same time, non-availability or not adequate availability of food items is another problem, because you see that not everyone in urban areas can afford food for that matter. And also, with respect to poverty and hunger, when we are going to discuss, you'll find that now we find increasing incidence of hunger in India compared to before. So in a way, hunger is increasing, and this which becomes very serious, because hunger for that matter is the poorest form of poverty, is the most important form of poverty, because someone, if you have 100 rupees, you would want to spend it first on food, because which is a dire need for that matter. Other aspects like education, healthcare, etc., can be taken care of, but the first important need is health, is food, right? So that is something that we'll discuss. Then again, with respect to nutrition, you're suggesting malnutrition, etc. Also, with respect to health and nutrition, you can talk about various lifestyle issues or diseases that are coming up. For instance, obesity. Now, also, if you talk about child labor, now children are engaged in a lot of activities in the cities. It can be beggary, that is generally you find across the city, particularly on your traffic signals and other public places, like if you have any monuments there, outside your public transport system, bus stops, etc. Then you talk about children engaged in various other economic activities, for instance, industries. But generally, you'll find that the reach of child labor or the extent of child labor is surprisingly very low with respect to service sector. If you think about this, you would not find child labor prevalent as such in the organized service sector. The reason is that they generally follow the norms that are there. They generally follow the government norms, and they're more, because they are primarily in urban areas. People have better levels of education, and the chances are, I'm not saying that they have, say, they would have done it if not for these factors, but yes, these are factors, increased level of awareness of people, etc., that impacts that. Then again, if you talk about child labor, you also talk with respect to beggary. You have someone has mentioned child trafficking, that can be mentioned. Then also with respect to that, you can talk about prostitution, because it is generally at the in the younger ages that girls are pushed into prostitution. So yes, they're engaged in construction work. Now also increasing menace of drugs and alcoholism. Right? Yes, great. Then you can also talk about the dimension of education. Better educational facilities. That is one positive. More skill-based education, because if they are skilled today, they'll get a better employment tomorrow. So with respect to skilling, with respect to the quality of education, with respect to the availability of education, but the problem is where? The problem is with affordability. The problem is with the rich and poor divide. The problem is with your public schools not providing better quality education, because the public schools are the ones who generally attract most of it. So someone has given an example of slum dwelling. Yes, it will impact your levels of health, your levels of education, etc. Great. So there are various dimensions with respect to children that we can see in terms of urbanization. So urbanization, one way is you break it down in various dimensions and you do it. Another way is you think about the negatives and positives of urbanization on children. Because the way a question has been asked with respect to women and globalization, it can be asked with respect to children and urbanization as well. Right. So yes, the change in family values, because with the change in institution of family, because we haven't taken institutions here. So with the change in institution of family, they are more they're more into your specialized institutions of schools and family, where they get socialized, and not just socialized, they're more vulnerable to harassment for that matter. Right. So these things can be understood. Yes, the idea of individualism, etc. Okay, great. So this is something with respect to urbanization and children. Urbanization women is also done. Then if you see, you can think of urbanization and elderly, which has been dead, because it has to proceed in a similar way as globalization. Then when we said that over urbanization is a problem in India, that the problem with respect to urbanization, the important effect of urbanization on India is that India has become over urbanized. Now, what are these various dimensions and challenges with respect to urbanization in India? Now we are coming to the challenges part. Now what we'll do is, rather than taking up suggestions separately, whenever there is a problem, we'll look into the solution there itself. Because all these suggestions will mostly come from your other subjects. Because one is, say, talk about environmental aspect. It will come, your suggestions will come from your ecology and environment for that matter. So what we're going to do is, we'll look at the problems, we'll look at the challenges, and we'll come up with a solution then and there itself. Also, another thing that I would want to tell you beforehand is, so one way is, think about over urbanization first. If you think about over urbanization, you'll find that more and more number of people are coming in, and it is mostly another question for you, another idea to think about. It is mostly because of the rural push rather than urban pull that people migrate. It is more because of the push rather than pull that people migrate. I hope this idea is getting clear. So this is a dimension in which we have to think. And you can again expect a question on this dimension, that it is more because of rural push rather than urban pull that we see as a factor of urbanization in India. So one is that idea. Now with that, if you want to come up with a solution, what you say is that why don't we develop our rural areas to such an extent that more and more people do not have to migrate? Now, when you talk about this, you would have to bring in policy level changes. So the changes that we are going to see, the ideas, the suggestions that we are going to see, we have to see one on a policy level, and the other idea is how we can bring changes from within. Right? So these are the dimensions in which we have to move. So please keep your ideas about governance, planning, various policy implementation open, because you read a lot of policies. And what we have to do is, one is that what is the problem? Another thing is, what are the suggestions? And also, what are the government interventions? Because a question has already been asked on Smart City program in the past, and similar questions on government intervention can be asked. So anyways, we're not going to discuss all those schemes, but we have to see that what are the issues, what are those schemes that target these, what are those government schemes that target these issues, and how can we make it even better. So I hope the idea is clear. This is the way we are going to proceed. Now just look at these images. These are common images that you find in the city. These are common challenges that you find in the city. The issue of beggary, the issue with respect to traffic and the pollution because of the emissions. Then this issue of waste disposal, which leads to land pollution. Then the issue of air pollution because of industries, because of vehicular pollution. Then with lack of housing amenities, with lack of housing infrastructure, the issue with respect to slums, which ultimately the levels of sanitation, dirty drinking water, improper waste disposal facilities, which ultimately lead to a health challenge. Then you see the issue with urban floods. And again, a question has been asked on urban floods, but in paper 3. So you have to remember that you have to look at these issues from various dimensions. Great. So let's classify these into economic, political, environmental, and social challenges. And let's see there itself that how can we deal with it. So we have understood the impacts of urbanization. Now, because of those impacts, there were a few negatives. We are going to take up all these negatives, all these challenges, and come up with a solution. Okay. So if we talk about economic challenges, you see the first issue that happens is overcrowding. So keep overcrowding in mind and start from there, because that's what the first idea of, or the first image of a city or an urban area is. The moment you land on the airport, or the moment you land on the railway station, the first thing that you experience is overcrowded cities. The first thing that you experience is that you feel suffocated. Why? Because there's so many people, there's so much noise pollution for that matter. So think about overcrowding and then come up with challenges, because that's the easiest way to approach this issue of urbanization. So with overcrowding, what will happen? People would not have adequate housing. If they do not have adequate housing, they tend to live in slums. Now with respect to slums, you will have other problems. They will not have proper electricity supply. They will not have drinking water. They will not have cleanliness. Also, if we talk about overcrowding and the ultimate burden on the resources, you can think of other resources like drinking water. It would not be available. It would not be available in plenty. Then electricity cannot be provided. And already, if we look at the consumption patterns in urban areas, it is way more compared to rural areas, because it is the rural areas who still suffer because of this disparity. Now, majority of our population lives in rural areas, but rural areas are the ones who get electricity for the least time. Because if you still go to say the so-called developed rural areas of Haryana, you'll find that you do not get electricity for more than 10 hours a day at times, and it is generally the case particularly in summers. Now, even though our population, more and more of our population living in rural areas, still our electricity or the resource distribution is different. But here, when we talk about urbanization, even in urban areas, the distribution is different. So you have areas where the affluent live, you have areas where there are industries set up, there are areas where you have service sectors, they get preferential treatment in terms of connection, in terms of electricity connection, and it is you'll find it rare that they get an electricity cut, because if there is an electricity cut for that matter, and think about a huge industrial plant, if they have to stop their work for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, the entire thing goes down, because you see the engine will take another few hours to get heated up, and if the production line stops, it will actually have an impact on the quality, because you would have to discard a few products that came out of that processing line. So you see that you do not have adequate electricity and drinking water supply. These are other resources. Then because cities are overcrowded, you'll find that you do not have equal economic opportunities. Now again, you remember it like this, that not having enough economic opportunities, not having enough to eat is no justification of committing crime. I'll repeat again, not having enough economic opportunities is not a justification of committing crime. But what we see is that because people do not have economic opportunities, they take resort to crime, like chain snatching, other forms of cybercrime. You would have thought of, say, the economic crimes that happen in ATMs. And of late, you have been seeing a lot of daylight robberies across cities in the country. And that is also, you can say, directly related to the after effects of COVID. Because if you see that, you'll find these number of cases increasing because people do not have enough. The market is right now going through problems. The market does not have enough economic opportunities to produce, enough employment to generate. And that is where you find that more and more people are taking resort to economic crimes. Now, ransom is basically, think about, say, taking some of your property and asking for money. So it can be considered as, say, equivalent to kidnapping, but in kidnapping, you are taking the children. You can either ask for money and take the children back. Otherwise, you can keep the children, not you. I don't mean that you would want to do that, but yes, what people do is they get them involved in beggary, etc. Then with respect to infrastructure, we have already seen that, because in resources you have, say, housing. Think about the housing, water. So in Hindi, basically, roti kapda makan is one. Then food. Then comes your economic opportunities or jobs. Now, because of this, you see that people do not get enough economic opportunities, they resort to crime. Also, you find that because of this poverty and unemployment, they get into a vicious cycle of poverty. Because of this unemployment and not getting enough resources, they get into a vicious cycle of poverty. And this vicious cycle of poverty, even though we discussed in greater detail in your chapter on poverty, you understand it as, if you do not have enough to eat, you cannot be productive. And if you're not productive, you cannot earn enough. And if you do not earn enough, you land in poverty. So this cycle of deprivation, the cycle of cause and effect, that the cause of poverty becomes an effect of poverty. Right? So they fall in this vicious cycle of poverty for generations to come. And then with respect to burden on resources, you think about the burden on education system, healthcare system. Because it was first the urban healthcare system that collapsed during COVID rather than your rural healthcare system, even though it is inadequate, even though it is insufficient. And also, at least the load on the rural healthcare system was initially less, but it was the urban healthcare system which collapsed during COVID. The reason being overcrowdedness. Then urban planning, economic inequalities. So urban planning with respect to, we can talk about, because these are separate points. Drainage system, proper waste disposal, say water supply. Then you think about the crowded roads. Why? Because of improper public infrastructure. Then you have economic inequalities in respect of your access and affordability of various resources. Because if you can afford, you can live in a better area. If you cannot, you do not get better economic opportunities, or you do not get better services. Then this unplanned development, or the issues with urban planning is unplanned development. That you do not see the problem of unplanned development is not say limited to urban areas. You think of it as a process. The process of development that has happened is, one is uneven development between rural and urban areas, which has led more and more people to move towards urban areas. Now, even in these urban areas, you'll find that it is in say areas, regions where you'll find there are say service sector offices, etc. Then you'll find proper residential areas in few regions. And a lot of part of the city which does not get enough attention is generally unplanned, is generally not recognized by the government, so they do not have proper water supplies there. So the unplanned small colonies that come up, right, particularly in cities like Delhi, you would have seen, if anyone's from Delhi, would have seen that these unplanned, unauthorized colonies that come up, the kind of issues they have. Then also your other public resources, like you can talk about transportation system. Think about Delhi. If not for your Delhi metro, the entire system of the city, the entire transport system would have collapsed. Why? Because you still find a lot of traffic, you still find all your public resources strained, even though they try to make better and better options for same. Then the level of traffic management that we have to take care of, because we see that traffic has become a problem now with the rise of middle class people, generally involved in service sector, who can afford a car, and with the proliferation of credit agencies, your bank loans have become easier now. Think about bank loans becoming easier, people having sufficient to eat, now looking for better quality of life, and cars and other vehicles becoming affordable. Because of this, more and more people buy these vehicles, more and more vehicles come on roads, which leads to a traffic congestion problem. And now you think about this, that if you talk about the solutions that we can provide to these, is just think about this, the economic challenges. Think about traffic management. If you talk about traffic management, why don't we incentivize public transport? Why do not we have dedicated bus corridors? Because on the lines of the city of Jaipur, if you would have seen, on the lines of city of Jaipur, you find we can go with dedicated bus corridors. They have dedicated bus corridors wherein the public transport bus will go. You cannot enter your private vehicle in those corridors, and only your public transport buses can move there. So the idea of dedicated bus corridors. Also, you talk about the idea of metro, because in most of the cities, even though it's coming up, so having this infrastructure, this metro infrastructure spread across the city. Also, if you think about metro, just think about this. So when it is a dedicated bus corridor, if you think about dedicated bus corridors only, think about dedicated bus corridors, the issue is that people would not refrain from entering their private vehicles there. Because if someone is from Jaipur, they can relate. They might be taking the same lane to avoid traffic, right? Because the challenge of implementation becomes a problem. Now that implementation can be made better with digital infrastructure, even though there can be restraint if we use digital infrastructure, CCTV cameras, etc., but and penalize people. But think about the idea of metro. The idea of metro is you have a dedicated corridor for a public transport that is not even accessible to other transports, because you cannot possibly take your Scorpio on a metro line, right? So it is a dedicated public transport corridor which has to be spread properly across the city. And also this analogy gives you an example of the ideas that sometimes government has to use. So they cannot always go with penalizing, they cannot always go with change in mindset, but at times you have to take even stricter measures. So when government chooses say strong hand with respect to policies, because ultimately you're going to become a bureaucrat, and this is expected from you, because you cannot always keep it easy, you cannot always make it easy on the people, right? At times you have to take strong measures for that matter. So this is how you can solve the problem of traffic management. Then you talk about the core issue being overcrowding. How to stop overcrowding? Having better opportunities in the areas that people are coming from, rather than creating a lot of, rather than creating a few smart cities, let's create more of rural areas and cities which have sufficient economic opportunities. Yes, so development of nodal cities. Then also you can think about overcrowding in terms of employment. So one is creating employment elsewhere. Another thing is having better employment opportunities in the cities as well. Having better infrastructure facilities, planning the cities better, developing your outgrowths so that more and more people can move. So the idea of national capital region, if we talk about say the cities like Gurgaon, Noida, now these are basically, if you look at them, these are basically an extension to Delhi, to the city of Delhi. That more and more people are moving in. You are creating industrial areas there. You're creating service sector units there. So more and more people use. Also, with respect to your urban planning, you can take examples from the city of Chandigarh, which in a way is equitable. So think about this. In most of the cities, you'll find you have roads. At times, the roads are not wide. It is generally only the government areas, particularly say talk about New Delhi, which has been properly planned. So you'll have wide roads, you'll have proper footpaths, you'll have way for pedestrians, cyclists, etc. You'll have proper green cover as well. But when you talk about other cities, generally you will not even find footpaths. On a lot of Delhi roads, you find there is no footpath available at all for pedestrians to move. So in that sense, you can say that our cities do not treat everyone equally. Our cities do not treat everyone equally. Our cities have a bias towards the richer classes. Also, then if you talk about what happens to the cyclists, because if we talk about the issue of pollution, one of the suggestions to improve the issue of pollution in city is to reduce vehicular pollution. To reduce vehicular pollution, you would have to either move towards e-vehicles, or you would have to move towards non-motored vehicles. Non-motored vehicles like bicycles. Now, if you do not have proper infrastructure in the city, how do you expect the ones riding bicycles to move across the city? Then right now, if you see your e-vehicles, your electronic vehicles are a little expensive. Also, there is no clarity as to what is going to be the expense in the future. What happens when the battery dies down? The current battery dies down. How do you dispose that battery? So there are a few challenges with respect to that you read in environment. Also, if you want to cope with the issue of pollution, traffic, what you can do is improve public transport. That has already been discussed. So this issue of infrastructure and the issue of equity, you can call it an issue of, one is infrastructure, that the infrastructure is not available. The infrastructure is not proper. And the other issue is the issue of equity, that the infrastructure is available, but people have different levels of access over it. So this is how you can understand the economic problems. And yes, there can be other issues that will come up. Also, when we talk about other challenges, you'll see that you'll keep thinking about solutions. So better urban planning means all the aspects of urban levels. And also you think about policy level as well. If you think of the solutions or the suggestions on policy level, that will also give you a clearer picture. Think about what government can do apart from say making infrastructure better. Now, if government wants to create infrastructure, they need money. So the finances have to be in place. If they want to change if you want to change to make changes with respect to urban planning, they would need autonomy. So more autonomy to your say city administration, more finances, more financial allocation. Now for those finances, what can cities do? They can come up with new modes of say income. Apart from taxes and the existing income structure, they can have more of revenue generation methods. See, the solution I'm not writing, why? Because these solutions are provided towards the end of the PPT, so need not worry, you can read it from there. Right now, why I'm taking it together is so that you understand that this is the problem and this is how it can be solved. Right? So please wait for it. The equity of challenge that a few of you have not understood is the challenge of equity is think about public infrastructure. Now, public infrastructure is meant for people coming from all castes, all genders, all classes. But generally, you find if you want to move your car, yes, you have roads. If there are potholes on the road, people make a lot of hue and cry about it that there are potholes on the road. What are we paying taxes for? One dimension. But at the same time, you'll find that there are no footwalks or say foot over bridges for pedestrians. There are no pathways for people who are riding bicycles. What is this? The problem of equity. That means everyone is not being treated equally by the cities. Everyone has different levels of access to resources. So I hope this idea is clear now. Then we talk about socio-cultural challenges. If we talk about socio-cultural challenges, think about a lot of people moving in there, the issue with housing, ultimately leading to slum expansion, and the issues related to slum that you can think about. The issues related to health, issues related to illiteracy, issues related to say the availability of electricity, the issue related to the diseases that spread. Then if you talk about your overcrowding of cities, you talk about a lot of people from various diverse cultural backgrounds coming in. Now, one way is that they get used to each other, they accept each other, they get used to each other, they accept each other. And other thing is that at times you find them fighting. At times you find conflict with respect to these changes, with respect to the cultural diversity. Right? So communal tensions can be one cultural challenge coming directly from diversity. Another cultural challenge can be loss of diversity, because I think they have not been covered here. So we talk about various cultural dimensions. We can talk about loss of diversity because of homogenization that we have discussed. Then another problem can be the communal conflicts because of people from diverse backgrounds coming and living together. Now, again, always remember, as has been highlighted during a discussion on diversity in India, that diversity need not necessarily mean that people will end up having conflict. There are other factors that you will read in communalism, on the chapter on communalism, that ultimately contribute and lead to communal conflicts. It is not diversity that leads to conflict, because for that matter, we have sustained diversity for a few thousand years now, right? Now, with respect to culture, you can think of these things because your cultural practices will die down, right? Then, if you talk about overcrowding of cities, people not having enough economic opportunities, the problem of prostitution also comes up. So, people will start getting, or particularly female members of the society, will be pushed towards prostitution. And again, it is also related to child and women trafficking as well. Then you have limited area, a lot of people will come and stay there. There'll be an easy flow of diseases. Satyam has asked a question with respect to prostitution. Let's deal it here. So, how can prostitution be a challenge of urbanization when prostitution has been existing for more than 1,000 years? Yes, it has been there because then there are issues. There are things that are there in the society like poverty. Then there are things like discrimination based on caste. Then we should not read any of those in terms of challenges. So we're not saying that it is exclusive to urban areas. Yes, you will find it in rural areas as well, but the extent is more in urban areas. Another thing about prostitution is just think about rural areas of India. In rural areas, it is mostly commune living. It is community living. People know each other. People stay in those social boundaries. Right? So the extent of prostitution is way less compared to urban areas and the organized form of prostitution that you see today. So I hope your question has been answered. Now, because of this, because of a lot of number of people living in a small area, because of high population density, you'll find that diseases, both communicable and non-communicable, spread rapidly. Now you can relate slums with both kind of diseases, etc. Then with this, as child labor has been discussed as during economic challenge. Why? Because if a family is poor, they move to urban areas looking for better opportunities, but they do not find it here. Then what do? They have to take care of their economic security, and every member of the family has to contribute to economic security. And children and women will contribute in their own way. So children end up working. Children and women end up begging on roads. Why? To contribute to the economic security of the family. So child labor and child crime again becomes a social issue because of the economic factors. Then the idea of nuclear family, because in cities you'll have more and more people living in nuclear families, and the challenges with respect to nuclear families. If you remember the functions, how they have changed, what happens to the elderly, the dual burden of work on women, and I hope you can relate those aspects. Yes, see, I'm not rejecting the idea of prostitution not being there previously. What I'm saying is the extent of it and the way it has been organized today is different. And with it, also you find the practice of child and women trafficking. So you have to look at the scale of it because poverty has been there previously as well. But we do not say that it is not available, it is not prevalent today. Right? So you have to look at the numbers. That's the idea about sociology. You don't have to keep yourself closed to these ideas. There are other social cultural challenges like beggary, you do not get proper nutrition, the diet is unhealthy. One is undernutrition, and the other one is overnutrition, which leads to problems like obesity, various lifestyle diseases that are coming up. And these lifestyle diseases have also been contributed by the physical inactivity. Because in rural areas, you'll find more and more people, or at least 70% of the rural population is engaged in agriculture. And agriculture is a physically taxing occupation. So you have to get involved in labor, physical labor. But in cities, it is mostly, one, it is the comfort of the city, that you have everything, every comfort available everywhere. Another thing is the kind of jobs that we have. Say, we relate Indian urbanization with service sector, and in service sector, you find you mostly have desk jobs that leads to physical inactivity. Then with betterment in your, say, economic status, in betterment of economic status of a family, it also leads to physical inactivity because then you'll have people work for you, right? Okay. Then you talk about commercialization of entertainment. One of the functions of family was to entertain its children, entertain the people. Now it has been shifted to private players. The entertainment has been commercialized. You have movies, you have OTT platforms, you have internet to get entertained. And also with these social cultural changes, also look at the changes that are happening on a psychological level. Right? The way that our values are changing. You also have to remember that. Yes, we do not have to talk about those changes here, but you have to remember, you have to keep those things in mind. Because just in case there is a question, if not here, but maybe in ethics. So talk about the change in values that is happening, and it has been discussed as well. So you had Mona Lisa is suggesting that can we relate physical inactivity to work from home? Yes, you can relate it to a certain extent, but work from home is not that prevalent for that matter. So, but yes, we can definitely use. Then you talk about various other challenges with relation to marital breakup or divorce. And as we have seen, as we have discussed, that in modern societies, it is you'll find that people are more vulnerable to marital breakup because divorce has now become is not something that is looked down upon or is something that you do not see. It has become common now. Then problem related to the elderly, problem related to children, women, elderly has already been seen. Then problems with relation to alcohol and drugs. Then you can talk about other crimes like cybercrime as well. So these are a few dimensions or social cultural dimensions rather with respect to urbanization. So I hope these things are clear because they are fairly simple and all these things have already been discussed. Then you talk about political challenges. Again, see, the question that was asked previously was directed more towards the policy level changes that have been brought about the government and what are the challenges with respect to that. Now, this is something that you read with policy and implementation because it is not possible to take up all the policies and schemes of the government and analyze one by one. So what we generally do is we create a few ground rules. So if we look into the pattern and we generally associate those challenges to the policies that are there. So apart from this, if you look at it in the light of what kind of challenges do we face politically, you'll find that we will not have enough financial resources and administrative autonomy to bring about changes with respect to urban planning. Then the levels of corruption that we have, and this is something that need not be discussed because corruption, you can understand. Now, apart from corruption, you'll find that this corruption is possible only when there is no transparency in the system. Because if there is no transparency, if I cannot see what the government contractor is investing in the roads, what is the quality of material, what is the money that he has invested, if there is no transparency, and then there is no accountability, that he's not accountable to anyone, no one is there to question the political class, then these become a problem because then the more and more discretion that they have, the chances are that the more corrupt practices will prevail. Then if we talk about lack of urban development policy, because we see with the phase of 5-year planning in India, we find various rural development programs being brought about every year. Like every 5-year plan, it was more focused towards rural development, and obviously it was desirable because because most of our population lived in rural areas. but we do not see similar level of urban development policy. Yes, we have schemes and policies that have been coming up. You can take example of, say, recent Amrut. You can take example of JNNURM. So we had urban development policies, but not as detailed and not as sustained as was rural development policy. Then improper urban planning, this is something that we have already discussed, that you do not have properly planned cities, which become a problem, because ultimately you see that there will be few areas which are developed properly, which have proper say areas to live. Then the issue with inequality, either say you look at urban areas, you'll have huge houses, huge residential complexes, and at the same time you'll find slums existing there. Then the attitude of our civil servants and the attitude of government with respect to implementation of projects, and you see that how our projects fail, because this is a criticism that you can see in each with respect to each and every policy. And yes, we are definitely going to analyze a few policies. We are going to look into the problems with respect to their design and implementation, but this is a general point that you can use here as well. Okay, so I had missed this point, that commercialization of entertainment. So we looked at commercialization of entertainment as a change, but commercialization of entertainment has negative impacts, because then one is the idea of consumerism that you get into, one is the idea of overusing it, then the issues with respect to the kind of, say, television shows that you have, the kind of exposure that children get, with respect to, say, you can talk about porn as well, pornography as well. So these can be a few issues related to commercialization of entertainment. And also, if something is left, you can just think about it, because it's very simple to find it. Improper planning is there in political challenges, because you see that it is the political class who has to take the decision, who has to do the decision making. And because of corrupt practices, because they would want their property rates to increase, they would want their property to get acquired in a government project, because the compensation is really good. Now, because of that improper planning. And again, you see that with respect to a few cities. Now, think about, say, for instance, Greater Noida. Now, it has been brilliantly planned. You see that there are wide roads, it's green, a lot of apartments and everything. But the problem is they do not have sufficient economic opportunities in the vicinity. Those areas have been developed, and you see that if you go on for 50 kilometers, you find those big buildings, residential complexes, but nothing is operational as of now. Nothing is working out. The occupancy levels are low. So yes, it has been planned. In the terms of, say, infrastructure planning, it is proper, but in terms of planning for, in terms of developmental planning, it's not proper, right? So you can take similar examples from people who are displaced. Say, if government has to create some infrastructure in a place, they would have to displace a few people, and then they'll be rehabilitated, because the land will be acquired by the government. Where do they go? They'll be rehabilitated by the government in other places. And you have seen in a lot of cases that government will design a properly planned, say, apartment for them, so that they can live, low-rise apartments. They'll have houses, say, 50 square yards. And the issue here is that yes, they plan the infrastructure well. Yes, they have provided them housing. Yes, they have provided land for land, but they haven't provided any economic opportunity, because at times these areas are located so far away from the city, so far away from industrial hubs, that people do not find any economic opportunities, and they end up leaving those projects. And this can be seen because there are various reports on various projects where it has happened. Now, either it can be because you cannot possibly think of someone who has, say, cleared this examination, who has been a part of policy making, because the policy making is not just taken up by government, not just by civil servants. There are other think tanks as well. So if they are formulating policies on that level, so their level of brilliance cannot be questioned. The level of brilliance that you cannot expect them to miss out on these simpler dimensions. That if a man or if a person has to live somewhere, he has to eat, he has to have economic opportunities. So somewhere you find that there can be other malpractices associated with it, the idea of corruption, etc. And I think it took a long time, improper planning, but yes, that's how it becomes a political challenge. Okay, if we talk about environmental challenges, one is excessive burden on resources. Because of excessive burden on resources, the idea of sustainable development gets lost. There's no idea of sustainable development. The pressure is so much that the water table is going down. You have pressure there, then you would not find clean water to drink. Then so many people coming in, overcrowding the cities, taking up a lot of vehicles, a lot of industries getting set up, because of which the air, water, land, everything is polluted. The issue with noise pollution, light pollution, the diseases, the issues that come up with that. And this is something which is very simple. And this is something that you read with respect to a chapter on pollution in environment and ecology. Along with that, another environmental challenge that is waste disposal. So you look at cities. Think about Delhi. Now, in outskirts of Delhi, Gurgaon, in this area, you'll find huge dumps of waste. They look like mountains. It looks like, if you go towards Gurgaon, it looks like an extension of the Aravallis, of the Aravali range, but it is not. It is a huge dump of waste, and which cannot be disposed, because there is no land left to dispose that waste. Also, with respect to environment, you find that with increasing population and the idea of commercial getting in between, because now it's not that you have to produce from this land. It is just that you have to consume from whatever society you live in. Because if it comes to your, say, your own agricultural land, then you'll be careful. Yes, because of lack of awareness, you might end up spoiling your land with a lot of fertilizers and pesticides. And maybe at times, because of contractual farming, you might end up polluting your own land. But when it comes to cities, you not have that idea. So the issue of consumerism in cities, yesterday we had discussed the idea of consumerism, the issue of consumerism, which generates a lot of waste. Where do you dispose that waste? Think about the electronic equipments only. Leave us just the electronic equipments or e-waste that is being generated every year. Where do you dispose that? So these can be a few challenges with respect to environment. Also, the issue of urban heat islands, wherein you simply say that an urban area will have a change in few degrees of temperature, will be a little warmer compared to the surrounding rural areas. The idea is simple, because in cities you have industries, because in cities you have a lot of people, because in cities you have vehicular pollution. So because of various human activities, you find that these urban areas are slightly warmer, a few degrees warmer, 3-4 degrees warmer compared to the rural areas, and at times more as well, depending on the level of human activities that are happening. Now, if you talk about these environmental challenges, you can think of solutions. Yes, carbon emissions. You can think of solutions as well. Now, to cope with this environmental challenges, one is this environmental challenge is happening primarily because of industries and vehicular pollution. So industries, you regulate better, you enforce your laws better, so that they do not dispose their waste in your rivers, in our rivers. Then, with respect to vehicular pollution, if you have to reduce vehicular pollution, you have to reduce the number of vehicles. So you incentivize people to take a public transport. You incentivize people to carpool. right? You incentivize people to take up e-transport in the sense you have to buy electric vehicles. And also, government is doing in that direction because you have subsidies with respect to that. You have metros coming up in every city, right? Then there is the few cities, for instance, the city of Bangalore has not just Bangalore, but it is across Karnataka. But you can think of it as Bangalore. Think of it as a disincentive to own a personal vehicle. So the taxes are more. You have to shell out more for the sake of registration, and also you will find it progressive. The bigger the vehicle, the more you would have to pay in taxes. Then what government is doing in this respect? Then other ideas can be pollution-free transport. The new buses that you see around in your cities, a lot of them are electronic, run on batteries. They are electronic buses. Then also you can talk about say the push of awareness that can happen, that you make people more and more aware. Then you relate to this the plastic ban, the ban on single-use plastic, etc. So these are a few problems, and what we have done is with these problems we have looked at various suggestions that we can provide, various solutions that we can provide to these problems. Now these solutions have been listed here that we'll come to in a minute. But before that, you remember that there are various government schemes which are there to target these issues. Now a few government schemes will be targeting urban areas directly. Then a few government schemes will be targeting issues that we find in urban areas. Right. So Clean India, PM Awas, Smart City Mission are something that target urban areas directly. Can you suggest any other government intervention with respect to these challenges that you find indirectly? That is indirect. That is not just meant for urban area, but yes, it helps solving the problem of over-urbanization in India. Can you suggest? It need not be a scheme, it can be a policy or anything. PM initiative for electric vehicles, Swachh Bharat mission is already there. It's written on the screen. MG Narega is for rural areas. Yes, it targets indirectly because you have to write. See, you have made a good point, but you have to write. Now, MG Narega, you have to understand, yes, it creates employment in rural areas so that people do not migrate to urban areas. Yes, someone has, Anusha has mentioned that Manrega for providing opportunities in rural areas. Then then policies with respect to population control. That's good. Good example. With respect to Clean India, with respect to disposal of waste, it is there. Better transportation and connectivity from rural areas, great, because you see more and more. If you're not able to create a lot of employment in rural areas, say this is an urban areas, then you have these areas, outgrowth and rural areas. Now, if there is proper public transport between these areas, people can come and go. So they would not be a burden on the social and economic infrastructure of the city. They'll come, work, do their job, and go back. So they would not be a stress on the resources of that area. So I hope you understood this idea. Yes. So various ideas with respect to disaster management. Great. Push towards renewable energy, creating employment by giving credit to MSMEs. Great. This is also, so you have to think about both the dimensions. So one is you have to stop people from rural areas going to urban areas. So if they're going, they go and come back. There has to be proper public transport. Another thing is that create employment opportunities in the rural areas so that people do not have to travel so much. So now if you want to, now think about it. Yes, so I think that's sufficient. So skilling people, Skill India program, providing, investing in social infrastructure in terms of health and education, that also helps with challenges with respect to urbanization. So great. This is great. Now, if you think about your rural areas, if you talk about creating employment in rural areas, how can you do that? Because one is that we have to think about developing rural areas. Because the problem of urbanization is not just, you have seen this, it is not just limited to the problems and challenges faced by urban areas. It is also related to urbanization as a whole in India. What are the levels of urbanization? What are the disparities, differences in levels of urbanization? That there are a few cities where population has exploded, who have been over-urbanized. Then there are rural areas who have been left behind. There are no economic opportunities whatsoever. So what we have to do is, we have to create a balance across the country. So when you look at urbanization as a challenge, do not just look at challenges with respect to pollution or slums, etc. You look at the larger picture. So if you want to create employment in rural areas, if you want to make rural areas better, rural areas smarter, what do you suggest? One is, what is the primary activity in rural areas? Agriculture. So the improvements in agriculture, the advancements in agriculture will definitely help. One. Another thing is food processing industries, because food processing industries need inputs from agriculture, and they can be set up there, thereby leading to equitable distribution of urban areas across the country. Also, so now we're talking about awareness. Okay, so the idea is, if you talk about awareness, yes, with respect to agriculture, how you can improve agriculture. But here, if you write an answer, see, if we say that we have to make our rural areas smarter in the sense to control urban population growth. We have to say develop our rural areas to control population growth in urban areas. And if we have to discuss this, if we have to look into this, so we would have to briefly talk about the dimension of agriculture. We cannot talk about the nitty-gritties of it. We cannot talk about, say, fertilizer subsidies, etc. We can give a passing reference. So improvement, advancements in agriculture by, say, subsidizing it, etc. Then we have to talk about food processing. Then we have to bring about changes on the social level as well with respect to social infrastructure. We have to provide healthcare facilities. We have to provide educational opportunities. So Vikas has suggested that Rajasthan government has introduced the scheme for urban Manrega. Good. That creating opportunities with respect to in urban areas as well. Great. So this is how you can think about it. Another thing is, let's look at the aspect of governance, a little aspect of governance, because once a question has been asked, which was not directed towards governance, but yes, it had a certain element of governance, because it was about the smart city program and how can it solve the problem of over urbanization, or how is it dealing with the challenges of urbanization? Because the problem with our policies is they are generally, even if there are urban, say, think about your smart cities. The idea is they are dealing with the challenges of governance in urban areas. That is fine, but they are not looking at the larger issue, because there's no way with the rate at which our population is increasing in urban areas, there is no way that we can possibly equip our cities for future. We cannot have infrastructure more than this, because if you have already say taken over footpaths and created roads in its place, Also, if you have taken land from people, widen the roads. What is the extent? Because if you already have, say, 3+3 6-lane roads in Delhi, but they're still crowded, there's still a problem of traffic. Now you cannot encroach on public and private property. You cannot go on encroaching. What do? So you improve infrastructure, etc. You improve public transport infrastructure. You create better opportunities elsewhere. Right? So that's how the larger picture of issues is missing. They do not deal with the primary cause of the problem. Now, if you look at this, there, because whatever we have been talking about can be classified into these dimensions. Apart from innovation, we have discussed pretty much everything, and they are mentioned as well. So think about this. If we talk about, say, from urban planning perspective, urban development or urban planning perspective, we see that we can have various portals of innovation. How? There are various cities in India who are doing well with respect to traffic management, who are doing well with respect to waste disposal. So why not have portals wherein people, wherein cities share their ideas, share the innovative ideas that they have, share how did they take care of the problem. And with this exchange of ideas, other cities can also replicate those policies and schemes with their particular changes and perform better. Similarly, if we talk about, say, planning, the planning aspect, so one is related to the financing of projects. We can rope in, say, private sector, and there are issues with privatization as well, that you generally read, the issues with privatization that you read in your economy that you can think of. Another way to finance is, because another way to finance is having more base of revenue, maybe, say, opening up tourist places, increase or say a push towards tourism that can add to revenue of the state, of the particular city. Then there can be other things as well. You can talk about contractual, and everything is mentioned there. Now you can talk about contractual work, which comes out cheaper in the long run. Yes, so you are mentioning a few ideas like Buddhist circuit. It is Buddhist circuit, not Buddhist, Buddhist circuit. Then capacity building. Now capacity building relates to two aspects: capacity building in terms of infrastructure, and capacity building in terms of your resources and public servants or public services. Because the public servants have to be also skilled. They have to be made to work, because generally what happens is, the ones who are involved in clerical work, yes, they get promoted over time, but the nature of work doesn't change, even in government services. And with respect to, say, your other services like civil services, they have a limitation to which they can contribute. Also, with respect to capacity building, it has to be, it needs to have a local character, because the way we say with planning, because the one who lives there, if you are from Bangalore, you stay in Bangalore, you will know better about the problems of your city compared to someone else. So someone who's working there, a civil servant who's there, rather than imposing Amrut from the top, rather than following same model of development across districts and cities, why not give it a local character? Why not give your districts, etc., more autonomy? Your city planning agencies more autonomy with respect to this. So these are a few ideas which can be worked out as suggestions to our problem of urbanization. So you can see, because all of these are discussed, I just run through the PPT. Yes, so Azhar is suggesting that generally civil servants, public servants do not innovate. They stick to the existing rules, ground rules. Yes, so that's in the sense that there is a limit to what they can offer. So all these suggestions have been discussed already with the problems, but I just run through the PPT. So just in case if something is left out, we can discuss that. So planned development of cities and creation of employment opportunities. So with respect to cities, it's not just the bigger cities, but smaller cities as well. Cities who have infrastructure. Say talk about cities in vicinity of your bigger metropolitan cities. Say 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers from there, wherein the industries do not have to suffer. Say if we talk about service sector, they again are dependent on say air transport. They have to travel. With respect to service sector, again they need proper digital infrastructure. So why not develop smaller cities with proper digital infrastructure, etc., so that companies are incentivized, because the cost of land will be less. The labor will be cheap there. Labor in the sense, the people who are going to get engaged in those economic activities. So why not plan it like that? Then rather than stop urban migration, you can think of reducing urban migration. Because stopping looks like a little, you can say, tyrannical, in the sense that even though our constitution has provided us this right of going and working anywhere, how can someone stop from migrating us to urban area? But it is not on policy level, but it is more targeted towards reduction in urban migration. How can it be done? The idea of smart village, the idea of setting up food processing industries in rural areas, the idea of advancements in agriculture, the idea of setting up your service sector or industrial units in smaller cities and towns. So you can think about these. Then public transport, a push towards public transport, incentivizing public transport, promotion of cycle culture. But again, with this way forward as well, what can be done? You'll find that there are problems involved in these as well. So if you want to promote cycle culture, you have to work on infrastructure as well. So you have to remember all these things, that whatever points we are mentioning here, they are again interrelated. So promotion of public transport, this is incentivizing people from taking up personal transport. Then empowerment of municipal corporations in terms of their autonomy, administrative and financial, so that they have sufficient funds and they have the autonomy to use those funds on the basis of the problems that are there in their particular limits. Inclusive urbanization, in the sense that if people are coming to urban areas, we have to consider urban poor as well. It has to be more equitable, in the sense that you have to have proper, if you do not have a lot of private schools which are affordable, then make the public schools better, then make the public infrastructure with respect to health better. And in this regard, you can think of Delhi government, who has done such a wonderful job with respect to these. Yes, it can be considered on a political level, it can be considered populist and whatnot. Yes, there can be charges of corruption, there might be corruption, because corruption is something that will prevail, because it comes from the mindset. It does not come with governments, or it does not come with policies, it comes with the mindset. So yes, it is going to prevail. But you see the level of betterment that they have done. They have made a difference. These schools and your health centers have made such a difference to the lives of so many people. So the urbanization has to be inclusive of the poor as well, because the cities, yes, are good, are great for the rich, but how about the poor? Then also, with respect to public policies, with respect to your implementation of various policies, people have to be made aware with respect to the challenges of environment. For example, the challenges with respect to not keeping their surroundings clean, the challenges with respect to separation or segregation of waste, for instance, so that we can target those issues. Also, you have to invite public participation with respect to your policies. That people should also contribute, because there are problems that people would know better. Someone living in the city would know what is the problem. So their participation is necessary, and not just in identifying, but also in terms of the role of civil society. So people should also be encouraged to help the government in this process, because you can talk about the tree plantation drives across cities that happen, which make our environment greener, and there are a lot of NGOs and other groups which take up that activity. So you can understand this as well, that one, role of public; second, role of government; and then third, role of civil society. Then the exploitation of resources has to be curbed. It has to be made, because think about, say, your electricity. Think about your resources like electricity. Now, don't you think there has been a misuse of electricity when we talk about service sectors? So if you make, just take a simple example, if you make the corporate buildings more, say, airy, if you make them open so that there is proper direct sunlight, you can save a lot on electricity. As simple as that. Now, why I'm saying this, because this looks like something that has to be done on an individual level, which would not make a lot of impact. But look at the spread and the energy, the energy consumption of service sector for that matter, and you understand that how big a problem it is, because the lights and everything is always on. So those kind of things. But here, what you have to do is you have to mention about sustainable use of resources. You have to take the idea of sustainable development, take the idea of making behavioral changes, and mention it here. Then the separation and segregation of organic and inorganic waste management, which can also help us with help us deal with waste disposal problems. Then the idea of transparency and accountability, I think it has been mentioned twice. It was mentioned previously as well, so that you can curb corruption with respect to this. Now there are two questions and a practice question. Now these two questions we'll take up tomorrow, but let's think about this practice question. This practice question is the idea that we have already mentioned, that I've already mentioned. What you have to do is you have to write this question and send it across, so that it'll be a quick revision for you with respect to urbanization. And even though this dimension has been covered in the class, but still you'll find it interesting to write. So urbanization in India is occurring not due to urban pull, but due to rural push. So how is it that it is the rural push that is leading to more and more urbanization or growth of urbanization in India, and not urban pull? Because now just think about this. Now it's not the charm of the cities that pulls you towards cities. It's not the amenities anymore, because now a lot of things like internet, etc., are available in rural areas as well. And then again, we see that the urban areas are dealing with this pollution problem, which has been blown out of proportion for that matter. So you see that it is not urban pull. Now we don't have that idea of city life that was there back in the 90s, because that was the time when the urban expansion was happening. The urban areas were the gap between urban and rural areas was increasing at that time, because the urban areas were getting smarter and smarter with the advent of internet, with the foreign direct investments coming in, and the gap was huge. So a lot of people were excited about moving to urban areas, but now it is not that much. So you have to understand on these lines, and you have to see what are the factors of rural push, and also you have to critically analyze it. So you have to talk about the other dimension of it as well. So how do they impact each other? How urban pull? What are the factors of urban pull? What are the factors of rural push? Great. So yes. Okay, you are suggesting answers. It's better you not suggest it today. It's better you write it, because if I discuss this right now in the class, what happens is all of the other students would also know that how to write this, and it's better if they think about it. They think about what can be the factors, so on and so forth. Let's give it time and try to write it. So with this, let's conclude for today. What tomorrow we'll do is we'll discuss this question with respect to urbanization. These questions have been asked in the previous year, and then we'll move on to the role of women